The last thing I saw before hitting the freezing ocean was my sister Melissa's smile, the kind of smile that said she'd been waiting years for this moment. "Say hello to the sharks for me, Erica." Her voice still echoes in my nightmares. I looked up at the yacht, desperate for someone to help. My stepmother stood at the railing, arms crossed, watching me drown like she was observing a mildly interesting science experiment. And my father. He turned his back. Actually, turned his back while his daughter drowned. But here's what they didn't know. I'm not easy to kill. They thought they'd executed the perfect plan. Eliminate me. Steal my $6.5 billion fortune, and live happily ever after on my money. They'd planned every detail, the remote location, the missing life vests, even the fake grief they'd perform for the cameras. What they didn't plan for was me surviving, crawling out of that ocean, and discovering the truth about who I really am. Because it turns out that $6, $5 billion. It wasn't even the real inheritance. The fortune they killed me for was nothing compared to what my biological mother left hidden, a legacy they had no idea existed. So when my grieving family came home from my funeral ready to divide up my assets and celebrate their victory, I was waiting for them in the living room, very much alive, with a gift box on the coffee table. "I brought you something," I said, watching the color drain from their faces. "Open it." Inside that box was evidence that would destroy them. But that was just the beginning. Stay with me, because what I did to the family who tried to murder me, let's just say they wished I'd stayed dead. This is the story of how I became the ghost that haunted my own killers. My name is Erica Newman, and at 35 years old, I'd built a technology empire worth $6.5 billion from absolutely nothing. I was the CEO everyone wanted to interview, the self-made billionaire who'd revolutionized cloud security systems. But none of that success ever filled the hollow space where a family's love should have been. The yacht invitation came on a Tuesday morning, handwritten on expensive cream stationery. "Family reconciliation trip," it said. "Let's finally talk." For someone who'd spent 3 decades trying to earn her family's affection, those words were irresistible bait. I should have known better. I'd built my fortune on analyzing patterns and detecting threats, yet I missed the most obvious danger of all the people who raised me. I arrived at the marina that Saturday morning, carrying fragile, foolish hope in my chest like a bird with broken wings trying to fly one more time. The yacht was magnificent, a gleaming white vessel that probably cost more than most people's houses. My stepmother stood on the deck wearing oversized sunglasses and a white linen dress that billowed in the ocean breeze. She looked like she was posing for a magazine spread about elegant coastal living. She didn't wave. My sister Melissa appeared next, her blonde hair perfectly styled despite the wind. She smiled when she saw me, but it was the same smile I'd seen 1,000 times before, the one that never quite reached her eyes, the one that said she was performing rather than feeling. Still, I returned it. I always returned it. "Erica, you actually came," Melissa called out, her voice bright with artificial enthusiasm. "We were starting to think you'd back out." "Why would I back out?" I asked, stepping carefully onto the deck. My designer heels clicked against the polished wood. I'd dressed carefully for this trip, wanting to look successful, but not intimidating put together, but approachable. Even now I was trying to make myself acceptable to them. "Oh, you're so busy with your important company and your important meetings." There was an edge beneath her cheerful tone, sharp as a razor blade hidden in cotton candy. "We barely exist in your world anymore." The accusation stung because it was backwards. They were the ones who'd kept me at arm's length my entire life. They were the ones who forgot my birthdays and missed my graduations, and never quite had time for family dinners when I was the one suggesting them. But I swallowed the defense rising in my throat. Today was supposed to be about healing, not rehashing old wounds. My father emerged from the cabin below deck. He looked older than I remembered, his hair grayer, his shoulders more stooped. When our eyes met, he flinched. Actually flinched, as if looking at me caused him physical pain. Then he turned his attention to the control panel, suddenly very interested in checking instruments that probably didn't need checking. "Hi, Dad," I said quietly. He nodded without looking up. "Erica." That was it. One word. My name spoken like it tasted bad. My stepmother finally removed her sunglasses, and her gaze swept over me with clinical coldness. "Well, shall we get started? We're losing the good light." I didn't understand what she meant about the light, but I nodded anyway. I'd spent my whole life nodding at things I didn't understand from this family, trying to find the secret code that would make them love me. The yacht pulled away from the marina, and I watched the shore recede with growing unease. Something felt wrong. The atmosphere on this boat was thick with tension, like the air before a thunderstorm. My stepmother and Melissa kept exchanging glances I couldn't quite interpret. My father's hands trembled slightly on the wheel. "So," I said, trying to break the uncomfortable silence. "What did you want to talk about? The invitation mentioned reconciliation." "All in good time," my stepmother said smoothly. "Let's get farther out first, away from the noise and distractions of the shore. We need privacy for this conversation." Privacy. The word sent a chill down my spine that had nothing to do with the ocean breeze. We were already far enough from shore that I couldn't see individual people on the beach anymore. How much privacy did we need? Melissa poured champagne into crystal flutes, the expensive kind that probably cost more than my first car. She handed one to our stepmother, one to our father, and finally one to me. Her fingers were cold when they brushed mine. "A toast," Melissa said, raising her glass, "to family, and to finally getting what we deserve." The phrasing was odd, but I raised my glass anyway. We clinked crystal in the sunshine, and I took a small sip. The champagne was excellent, of course. Everything in this family had to be excellent on the surface, even when it was rotting underneath. We sailed for another 20 minutes in near silence, broken only by my increasingly desperate attempts at conversation. I asked about their lives, their plans, their interests. I got one-word answers or dismissive shrugs. My stepmother checked her watch 3 times. Melissa kept looking at the horizon as if expecting something. Finally, when we were so far from shore that the coastline was just a hazy line in the distance, my father cut the engine. The sudden silence was deafening. The yacht bobbed gently on the calm water, and I realized with creeping horror that I couldn't see any other boats nearby. We were completely alone out here. "Well," my stepmother said, setting down her champagne flute with careful precision. "I suppose we should get this over with." "Get what over with?" My voice sounded small, childlike. Some instinct was screaming at me to run, but there was nowhere to run on a boat in the middle of the ocean. Melissa moved closer to me, and I saw something in her expression that I'd never seen before, or maybe I'd always seen it but never let myself acknowledge it. Pure, undiluted hatred. "You know, Erica," she said conversationally, as if we were discussing the weather, "I've wanted to do this for a very long time." "Do what?" I backed up a step. My heel caught on a cleat and I stumbled slightly. That's when she moved. Fast, so fast I didn't have time to react. Her hands connected with my shoulders, shoving hard, and suddenly I was tipping backward. Time stretched like taffy. I saw my stepmother's arms cross over her chest, her face completely calm. I saw my father turn his back, his shoulders hunching as if bracing against something terrible. And I heard Melissa's voice bright and cheerful as I fell. "Say hello to the sharks for me." Then I hit the water. The cold was a physical shock, driving the air from my lungs. I went under the ocean, swallowing me whole. When I fought my way back to the surface, gasping and sputtering, I looked up at the yacht. Surely they would help me. Surely this was some horrible joke. But Melissa was smiling. My stepmother was checking her watch again, and my father had his back turned, but I could see his shoulders shaking. "We shouldn't wait any longer," I heard my stepmother say, her voice carrying clearly across the water. "Start the engine." The words crashed into me harder than the ocean ever could. They weren't going to help me. They weren't turning back. This wasn't an accident. They'd brought me out here to kill me. The yacht's engine roared to life, and I watched treading water in my ruined designer dress as my family sailed away, leaving me to drown in the middle of the ocean. As the yacht became a white speck on the horizon, my mind finally caught up with my body. The missing life vests I'd noticed earlier, the remote location, the careful timing. This was planned, calculated, premeditated murder. And the last image burned into my brain wasn't Melissa's cruel smile or my stepmother's cold indifference. It was my father's face in that split second before he turned away. I'd expected to see guilt or remorse or shame. Instead, I saw terror. Pure, consuming terror. Dad wasn't avoiding me out of guilt. He was terrified of something far worse than my death. The yacht disappeared completely about 10 minutes after they left me. I know because I counted every second, my business mind still working, even as my body began to shut down in the freezing water. 10 minutes and 37 seconds before the white speck vanished beyond the horizon, taking with it any chance of rescue from the people who were supposed to love me. The ocean at dusk is nothing like the romantic paintings suggest. It's not peaceful or majestic. It's indifferent, and that indifference is more terrifying than any active malice could be. The water doesn't care that I built a billion-dollar company. It doesn't care that I have 3,000 employees depending on me, or charitable foundations waiting for my donations, or business partners expecting my signature on contracts next week. The ocean would swallow me as easily as it would swallow anyone else, and the world would keep turning. But I refused to let that happen. I kicked off my heels, watching them sink into the darkness below. My dress became a lead weight, but I couldn't risk removing it entirely. I needed some protection from the cold. I treaded water, conserving energy, trying to remember everything I'd ever read about ocean survival. Stay calm. Don't panic. Panic uses oxygen. Panic kills. The sun was setting, painting the sky in colors that would have been beautiful if they weren't signaling my approaching doom. Darkness on the ocean meant I'd be invisible to any passing boats. Darkness meant hypothermia would set in faster. Darkness meant the end. That's when I felt something brush against my leg. The panic I'd been holding back surged through me. Shark. The word exploded in my mind. Melissa's last words echoed, "Say hello to the sharks for me." I thrashed away from whatever had touched me, and that's when my left arm scraped against something solid and unforgiving. The pain was instantaneous and excruciating. Something sharp metal, I realized, sliced through the flesh of my forearm from elbow to wrist. I screamed, swallowing seawater, choking and flailing. Blood bloomed dark in the water around me, and I thought wildly that this was it. This was how it ended. The blood would attract real sharks, not imaginary ones, and my family's plan would succeed after all. But the pain also did something unexpected. It shocked me back into clarity. The searing agony cut through the hypothermic fog settling over my brain. I could think again. I could fight again. I reached out carefully this time, exploring what I'd hit. My fingers found metal, some kind of submerged debris, maybe part of an old buoy or discarded equipment. And attached to it, rising and falling with the waves, was a wooden crate. Not large, maybe 2 feet square, but floating, solid, real. I grabbed it like a drowning woman grabbing salvation, because that's exactly what I was. The crate bore me up, taking enough of my weight that I could rest without sinking. My arm screamed in protest, blood still seeping from the wound, but I barely felt it anymore. The crate was life. The crate was hope. I wrapped my good arm around it and held on as the sky darkened from orange to purple to black. Stars appeared, more stars than I'd ever seen in the city. They were beautiful and terrible witnesses to my struggle that could offer no help. I talked to myself, forcing words past chattering teeth. Stay awake. Hold on. Someone will come. You didn't survive this long to die now. The cut on my arm throbbed with every heartbeat, and through the pain, a strange thought emerged. This scar would prove everything. If I survived when I survived, I would have permanent evidence carved into my own flesh. Proof of this night, this betrayal, this murder attempt. They couldn't deny what they'd done when I carried the evidence with me always. I don't know how long I drifted. Time became meaningless in the dark. Hours, certainly. Maybe longer. The cold seeped so deep into my bones that I stopped shivering, which some distant part of my mind recognized as a very bad sign. I kept slipping in and out of consciousness, jerking awake each time my grip on the crate loosened. The sky was just beginning to lighten that deep blue of pre-dawn when I heard the engine. At first I thought I was hallucinating, but the sound grew louder, closer. A boat. An actual boat. I tried to shout, but my voice came out as a croak. I tried to wave, but my arms wouldn't cooperate. The boat was small, a working fishing vessel that had seen better decades. A spotlight swept across the water, and I heard a rough voice call out, "I see something, 10 o'clock." The light found me. I must have looked like a corpse, already pale and bloody and half drowned. The engine cut, and suddenly there were hands pulling me from the water, voices speaking words I couldn't quite process. Someone wrapped me in blankets that smelled like fish and diesel fuel, and I'd never experienced anything more wonderful in my life. "Jesus Christ," a man's voice said. "How long you been out here?" I couldn't answer. My teeth were chattering too hard. "Get her below deck. Start the engine. We need to get her warm fast." They carried me down narrow stairs into a cramped cabin that felt like paradise, simply because it was dry and out of the wind. Someone, an elderly man with weathered skin and kind eyes, began examining my arm with practiced efficiency. "This needs stitches," he said. "Needs them bad. You're lucky it's not deeper, or you'd have bled out already." "No hospital," I managed to force out between chattering teeth. "Please, no police, no hospital." The fisherman's hands paused. He studied my face with those kind eyes that had seen too much in his long life. "Someone did this to you on purpose." It wasn't a question, but I nodded anyway. He was silent for a long moment, continuing to clean and bandage my wound with supplies from a battered first aid kit. "These waters have swallowed more people than you'd think," he finally said, his voice heavy with something darker than superstition. "I've been fishing here for 43 years. I've seen things that don't make the news. Accidents that aren't accidents." My heart, which had finally begun to slow to something approaching normal, picked up again. "What do you mean?" He tied off the bandage with careful precision. "I mean, you're not the first person I've pulled out of this exact stretch of ocean under circumstances that don't add up. I mean, the Coast Guard doesn't ask too many questions when wealthy families report tragic boating accidents. And I mean that sometimes people who know too much about those accidents end up having their own accidents." The implications crashed over me like another wave. "You rescued someone else here." "Long time ago," he said quietly. "Maybe 25-30 years back. Young woman not much older than you. Same story, dumped in the middle of nowhere, left to die. She didn't make it as long as you did. Died 2 hours after I got her on board, hypothermia and seawater in the lungs. But before she went, she told me her name and what happened." "What was her name?" I whispered, though some part of me already knew I was about to hear something that would change everything. "Brooks," he said. "Elena Brooks. And she said her husband's family threw her off their boat because she wouldn't sign away her daughter's inheritance." The world tilted. Elena Brooks. That name meant nothing to me, but the way he said it with certainty and old grief meant it should have. And a daughter's inheritance. I'd built my own fortune. I didn't inherit anything from anyone. My parents, the people I'd called my parents, had never mentioned any inheritance. "Why didn't you report it?" I asked. His expression darkened. "I tried. Filed a report with the Coast Guard, talked to local police, even tried to reach out to the family she mentioned. You know what happened. 2 days later, my boat nearly sank from what the investigator called faulty maintenance. Week after that, my grandson got jumped walking home from school. Then my wife got a call saying someone knew where our daughter lived, knew what time she dropped the kids at school. The message was clear: shut up, or everyone you love dies." My mind raced despite the exhaustion dragging at me. If Elena Brooks had been killed in these same waters 30 years ago and I'd nearly been killed, now that meant this wasn't about me specifically. This was a pattern, a method. The Newman family had done this before and they'd gotten away with it. How many others? How many people had these waters swallowed for my family? "Did she tell you anything else?" I pressed. "Before she died." "Said her daughter's name was Erica," he replied, and my blood turned to ice again despite the blankets. "Said if anything happened to her, someone needed to find Erica and tell her the truth about who she really was. If someone else survived, if Elena Brooks survived long enough to speak a name who pushed her, and why didn't she come back?" I stared at the fisherman, his words echoing in the tiny cabin like a death knell. Erica. Elena Brooks had said her daughter's name was Erica before she died. My name. My name spoken by a drowning woman 30 years ago in these same waters. The fisherman gave me space to process moving to the small galley to heat water for tea. I sat wrapped in blankets that smelled like decades of ocean work, my bandaged arm throbbing, my mind spiraling. The cabin was cramped and cluttered with the accumulated necessities of a working fisherman's life, nets hung to dry tackle boxes stacked in corners, navigation charts rolled and stuffed into cubbyholes. It felt more real than any space I'd inhabited in years. And in that realness, surrounded by proof that the world existed beyond my family's carefully constructed lies, memories began surfacing like bodies rising from deep water. I'd never questioned why there were no photos of me before age 5. That realization hit me with physical force, now making me gasp. How had I never questioned that I'd seen the family albums countless times? Leather-bound volumes my stepmother kept on the shelf in the formal living room, the one we were never allowed to use except for important guests. There were hundreds of photos of Melissa as a baby, a toddler, a preschooler. Melissa in a high chair covered in birthday cake. Melissa taking her first steps. Melissa at the beach at the park at Christmas morning, surrounded by presents. And then there was me appearing suddenly at age 5 like I'd materialized out of thin air. The first photo showed me standing stiffly in a formal dress at what must have been some kind of family event, my expression solemn and uncomfortable. No context, no celebration, just there suddenly existing in their world. When I was younger, maybe 10 or 11, I'd asked my stepmother about it. "Why aren't there any baby pictures of me?" I'd been looking through the albums, feeling that familiar hollow ache of being less than being other, being wrong somehow. She'd barely looked up from her magazine. "You didn't like having your picture taken. You were a very difficult child about cameras." Even then, the explanation felt wrong. What 3-year-old has strong opinions about photography? What infant refuses to be photographed? But I'd accepted it because I accepted everything they told me. I'd twisted myself into knots trying to understand how I'd been such a problematic child that my own mother couldn't even photograph me. Now, sitting in this fishing cabin with my arm sliced open and my entire identity crumbling, I understood. Those weren't oversights. They were erasures. Deliberate, systematic erasures of the first 5 years of my life because those years hadn't been spent with them. Those years belonged to someone else. To Elena Brooks. The fisherman returned with 2 chipped mugs of tea. I wrapped my good hand around one, letting the heat seep into my frozen fingers, and more memories came flooding back. The birth certificate. God, the birth certificate. I'd needed it for my driver's license, for college applications, for my passport. Every single time my parents provided a photocopy. "The original is in the safety deposit box," my father would say. "No point risking it getting damaged." It seemed reasonable, responsible even. Except I'd never once seen inside that safety deposit box. Never been taken to the bank to retrieve any documents myself. Everything always went through them, filtered through their control. And questions about family history were always deflected with the smooth skill of practiced liars. In high school, we'd had an assignment to create a family tree. I'd asked my stepmother about her parents, about her childhood, about medical history. "Why do you need to know all this?" She'd snapped, her usual cool composure cracking just slightly. Your grandmother died before you were born. These questions are morbid. It's for school, I'd explained, confused by her reaction. We have to go back 3 generations. Then make something up. Use the internet. I'm not spending my afternoon excavating ancient history for a pointless school project. I'd internalized that response as my fault somehow. I was being too demanding, too nosy, asking for too much of her time. I'd created a family tree using genealogy websites and half-truths, feeling guilty the entire time for being such a burden. But there was another memory, one I'd buried so deep I'd almost convinced myself it was a dream. I must have been 6 or 7 standing outside the elementary school gates waiting for pickup. A woman approached me, 30s maybe, with dark hair and eyes that looked at me with desperate recognition. "Erica," she'd said, kneeling to my level. "Erica, baby, don't you remember your mother?" I'd backed away, frightened by this stranger's intensity. I knew what my mother looked like, and it wasn't this woman. Before I could respond, my stepmother's car had screeched to the curb. She'd grabbed my hand so hard her nails left marks and pulled me toward the vehicle. "Get away from my daughter," she'd hissed at the strange woman. "I'm calling the police." The woman's face had crumpled. "Please, just let me talk to her. Just for a minute. She deserves to know." But my stepmother had already shoved me into the car, locking the doors. As we drove away, she'd gripped the steering wheel with white knuckles and said in a tight voice, "Some people are sick and say crazy things. If anyone ever approaches you like that again, you scream and run. Do you understand me?" I'd nodded, terrified by her reaction more than the encounter itself. At home, my father had made calls in his study with the door closed, his voice a low, angry murmur. The next day, there were police stationed outside the school. Within the week, we'd moved to a different district entirely. "Better school system," my parents had said. "Better opportunities for you girls." Now I understood. That woman hadn't been a stranger. She'd known my name. She'd called herself my mother. And my family had moved heaven and earth to keep her away from me, to erase that encounter from my memory, to ensure I never questioned their story again. The tea had gone cold in my hands. I looked at the fisherman who was watching me with patient, knowing eyes. They didn't betray their daughter. I whispered, the truth settling over me like a shroud. They stole someone else's. The fisherman's name was Marcus, and he didn't ask questions when I told him I needed to access the internet without leaving a digital trail. He simply handed me an old tablet and said, "My grandson set this up with some kind of privacy thing. Says the government can't track it. Good enough for you." It was good enough. My hands shook as I pulled up the news sites searching for my own name. Part of me hoped I'd find nothing, that maybe they'd waited a reasonable amount of time, that maybe this was all some terrible misunderstanding that could still somehow be explained away. I found the article within seconds. Tech billionaire Erica Newman, missing after family yacht trip. The timestamp made my stomach drop. Posted 4 hours after they'd pushed me overboard. 4 hours. I knew from my own experience in crisis management that most missing persons reports aren't filed for at least 24 hours, sometimes 48. The Coast Guard doesn't launch full search operations until there's genuine cause for alarm. Yet here was my family reporting me missing before the sun had even set on the day they'd tried to kill me. The article quoted my stepmother, "We're devastated. Erica was taking photos near the railing when a wave must have caught her off balance. By the time we turned around, she was gone. We searched for over an hour but couldn't find her in the dark water." The lies were smooth, practiced, perfect. They'd even managed to produce tears for the cameras, their faces portraits of anguished family members facing unthinkable loss. But it was the second article that made my blood run cold. Newman family begins legal proceedings following tragedy. I clicked with trembling fingers and read about how the family's attorneys had already filed preliminary death certification documents, already started the process of accessing my estate, already begun dividing my assets. The article was sympathetic, noting how difficult it must be for a grieving family to handle such practical matters during emotional turmoil. But I knew better. Those documents didn't appear overnight. Death certificates require specific legal procedures, notarized statements, witness testimonies. The fact that they'd already initiated the process meant the paperwork had been prepared in advance, before the yacht trip, before they'd ever invited me to that doomed reconciliation. They'd planned my funeral before they'd even killed me. Marcus refilled my tea without comment, giving me space to process. I scrolled through more articles, each one twisting the knife deeper. Insurance claims being filed, estate lawyers making statements, my company's board calling emergency meetings to discuss succession plans. "I need to contact someone," I told Marcus. "Someone from the docks where they kept the yacht, but it has to be anonymous." He nodded slowly. "You thinking what I'm thinking about safety equipment?" "Life vests are required by maritime law," I said, my business mind clicking through the implications even as my emotions reeled. If they were removed before departure, that's not an accident. That's evidence. Marcus knew a dock worker, a kid who'd grown up fishing with his father and needed extra money for college. One encrypted email later carefully worded to sound like a concerned citizen, asking routine questions about safety compliance, and I had what I needed. The dock's security footage time-stamped and date-stamped showing my family's pre-departure preparations. I watched the grainy video on Marcus's tablet, and each frame was another nail in their coffin. There was my father methodically removing life vests from the storage compartments. There was my stepmother checking each one off on what looked like a list. There was Melissa dropping them into a dock bin marked for repairs, ensuring they'd be nowhere near the yacht when we departed. The footage was clinical in its clarity. No rushing, no furtiveness. Just systematic, calm removal of every single flotation device that might have saved my life. They'd eliminated my survival chances with the same efficiency my stepmother used to plan dinner parties. I felt sick. Not the physical sickness of hypothermia and trauma, but the soul-deep sickness of understanding that the people who raised you had been planning your murder with checklists and contingency plans. "You'll need that footage," Marcus said quietly, "when you're ready to fight back." "I'm downloading everything," I confirmed, fingers flying across the tablet despite the bandage on my arm. "Every article, every statement they've made, every legal filing. They're building a narrative, and I need to know exactly what they're saying." That's when I found it. Buried in my cloud backup in an email folder I rarely checked because it was automated business correspondence, was a message from 3 years ago. The sender was a law firm I didn't recognize, and the subject line read, "Re Brooks Estate Inquiry." My finger hovered over it. Brooks. Elena Brooks, the woman who'd drowned in these same waters, calling my name. I opened it. The email was brief, professional, and devastating. "Dear Mrs. Newman, as discussed, we advise against responding to inquiries regarding the Brooks family estate. Ms. Newman's adoption was legally finalized before any inheritance disputes could be raised. However, we recommend monitoring the situation as Ms. Newman approaches age 35, when certain trust provisions may activate. It would be prudent to ensure all documentation remains secure, and that Ms. Newman has no access to original records that might prompt questions." Attached was an earlier message one my stepmother had sent to these lawyers. "We need to act before Erica turns 35 and starts asking questions about the inheritance. The trust documents specify age 40 for final distribution, but at 35 she gains the right to review all related paperwork. We cannot let her see those files." I read it 3 times, my mind refusing to process the implications. Inheritance, trust documents, final distribution at age 40. I'd built my company from nothing. I'd bootstrapped my first startup, worked 100-hour weeks, made every dollar through my own brilliance and determination. My fortune was mine, self-made, nothing to do with any family legacy. Except apparently it wasn't. Apparently there was another fortune, one I knew nothing about, one that was supposed to come to me from Elena Brooks. And my family had spent years ensuring I never discovered its existence, planning to eliminate me before I could claim what was rightfully mine. The pieces started falling into place with horrible clarity. They'd kept me close enough to control, but distant enough that I never felt secure enough to dig into my own past. They'd raised me just successfully enough that I'd become financially independent through my own work, never needing to question whether there might be family money I was entitled to. And they'd planned with meticulous care to kill me at exactly the right moment after I'd built a fortune they could claim through inheritance as my family, but before I turned 35 and gained access to records that would reveal the truth. I looked at Marcus, my voice barely a whisper. If it wasn't the fortune I built, then what inheritance were they killing me for? Marcus let me stay in his cabin for 3 days while I recovered enough strength to think clearly. During that time, I used his grandson's encrypted tablet to access my company's systems through layers of security protocols I'd personally designed. If I was going to find the truth about this mysterious inheritance, I needed to go deeper than public records. I needed to access the kind of financial databases that most people didn't know existed. My company, CoreGuard Security, specialized in protecting digital assets for the ultra-wealthy. That meant we had access to consolidated financial tracking systems that could trace money across institutions, countries, and decades. I'd built these tools to help clients monitor their own wealth and detect fraud. Now I was using them to uncover fraud committed against me. I started with my own social security number, running it through every financial database I could access. Standard accounts appeared first: my business accounts, investment portfolios, the trust fund my parents had established when I turned 18. All familiar territory. But then, buried beneath layers of corporate structures and legal entities, I found something that made my breath catch. Elena Brooks Trust for EB account, established April 15, 1995. Current value $1,227,450, $392. $1.2 billion. Opened when I was 5 years old, the same year Elena Brooks had drowned in these waters, the same year I'd mysteriously appeared in the Newman family photographs with no explanation for the missing earlier years. My hands trembled as I pulled up the account details. The trust was structured, brilliantly designed by someone who understood both finance and survival. The principal had been invested in a diverse portfolio of tech stocks, real estate holdings, and venture capital funds. 30 years of compound growth had transformed whatever initial sum Elena had deposited into a massive fortune. And I'd never known it existed. The account wasn't hidden exactly, it was simply set up in a way that required specific knowledge to access. The trust documents listed me as the beneficiary, but with provisions that prevented access until certain ages. At 25, I could have requested account statements. At 35, I gained the right to review all trust documentation. At 40, I would receive full control and distribution rights. I was 35 years old. According to these documents, I should have received notification months ago about my right to review the trust papers. But of course, that notification would have gone to the address of record, the Newman family home. The address they controlled, the mail they screened. They'd intercepted it. They'd known this was coming and they'd planned accordingly. The yacht trip hadn't been random. It had been timed precisely to eliminate me before I could legally access information that would expose everything. I searched for Elena Brooks next, my heart pounding. Public records showed a death certificate from 1995, vehicle accident, brake failure, no witnesses. The investigation was listed as closed files sealed by court order. That last detail made my stomach turn. Police investigations are public record unless there's a compelling legal reason to seal them. What reason could possibly justify hiding the details of a traffic accident? I dug deeper using corporate intelligence tools that skirted the edges of legality. The accident report, even in its redacted form, showed irregularities that would have been obvious to any competent investigator. The brake lines hadn't just failed, they'd been cleanly cut. The forensic examination had been rushed completed in less than 24 hours, when standard protocol required 3 to 5 days for a fatality investigation. And the medical examiner who'd signed off on the report had retired abruptly, 2 weeks later, moving to a different state and refusing all interview requests. Elena Brooks hadn't died in an accident. She'd been murdered, and someone with significant influence had made sure the investigation went nowhere. The same someone who'd tried to kill me in the same waters where Elena's body had been found. I was so focused on the digital investigation that I didn't notice Marcus approaching until he cleared his throat. "This came for you," he said, holding out a battered envelope. "Mail forwarding service. Been bouncing around addresses for years, apparently." The envelope was yellowed with age, postmarked 15 years ago from a law office I didn't recognize. It was addressed to me at an apartment I'd lived in briefly during graduate school, then forwarded to 3 subsequent addresses before finally reaching Marcus's dock through some miracle of the postal system's persistence. Inside was a handwritten letter on expensive stationery, the ink slightly faded but still legible. The handwriting was elegant but shaky, as if written by someone whose hands trembled with emotion or fear. "My dearest Erica," it began. "If you're reading this, it means I didn't survive to tell you the truth in person. It means they won." I sat down hard on the cabin's narrow bunk, the letter trembling in my hands. "You are my daughter, not theirs. Your father was David Brooks, a good man who died when you were 2 years old. I raised you alone for 3 years, the happiest years of my life. But then they came for what I'd built, for the fortune I'd accumulated and wanted to leave to you. When I refused to sign it over, they threatened your life. They said accidents happen to children all the time. They made me choose between giving you up to them or watching you die." Tears blurred my vision, but I forced myself to keep reading. "I gave you to them because I thought it would keep you safe while I fought them through the courts. I thought I could win you back legally. I was wrong. If you're reading this, it means they've eliminated me and you're in danger too. Get away from the Newmans. They were never supposed to raise you. They were supposed to protect you until I could reclaim custody, but they'll never let you go now. The trust I established is yours, every penny of it. Use it to fight them. Use it to be free." Attached to the letter was a faded photocopy of a birth certificate. Mother Elena Brooks, Father David Brooks, child Erica Marie Brooks. Born March 3, 1990. Not Newman. Brooks. My entire identity was a lie built on my mother's corpse and my father's grave. The letter continued. "I've hidden evidence, established protections, set up fail-safes. But if you're reading this, those weren't enough. I'm sorry I couldn't be there to protect you, my darling girl. I'm sorry for everything they'll do to you. Please forgive me for the choice I made. I thought I was saving your life. I might have only delayed your death." It was signed simply, "Mom," with a postscript that made my heart stop. Trust no one with the Newman name. Trust only the Foundation. They'll find you when you need them most. I looked up at Marcus, the letter shaking in my hands. "My mother didn't leave me wealth," I whispered. "She left me a warning I found 30 years too late." I read Elena's letter 3 more times each pass, revealing new layers of horror and heartbreak. Marcus gave me privacy, busying himself with repairs on deck, while I sat in his cramped cabin holding words written by a dead woman who'd loved me enough to die trying to protect me. The next section of the letter detailed the threats Elena had faced, and reading them felt like watching a nightmare unfold in slow motion. She described men following her home from work, anonymous calls in the middle of the night, warning her that accidents happen to little girls who play too close to swimming pools. She wrote about her car being vandalized repeatedly, about finding her apartment broken into with nothing stolen, but everything subtly disturbed, moved just enough to send a message: "We can reach you anywhere." "They never made direct threats I could report to police." Elena wrote, her handwriting growing more agitated, pressing harder into the paper. "They were too smart for that. Everything was deniable, coincidental, just unfortunate circumstances that kept happening with increasing frequency. But I understood the message clearly: sign over control of the trust fund I'd established for you, or watch you suffer the consequences." She described the Newman family as friendly on the surface but dangerous in the shadows. People who'd built their reputation on charitable work and social prominence while orchestrating financial manipulation behind closed doors. They'd approached her initially as concerned family friends after David's death, offering to help a struggling widow manage her late husband's estate. But their help came with strings contracts that would have given them control over assets that should have gone directly to me. When Elena refused, the harassment escalated. "They poisoned my professional relationships," she wrote. "Suddenly, clients were dropping my firm, citing concerns about my stability. Rumors circulated that I was having a breakdown after David's death, that I was becoming paranoid and unreliable. I watched my business collapse in 6 months, destroyed by whispers and strategic sabotage I couldn't prove. The letter's tone shifted between fierce maternal love and rising terror. She wrote about hiding me with trusted friends for weeks at a time, moving me between safe houses, trying to keep me beyond their reach while she fought them legally. But every lawyer she hired either withdrew mysteriously from her case or suddenly became unavailable. Court dates were postponed indefinitely. Evidence disappeared from filing cabinets. I was losing, Elena admitted in shaky handwriting. They had resources I couldn't match, connections I couldn't counter. And then they made their final play. They showed me photographs of you at your preschool, time-stamped and dated. They knew which days you attended, which teachers supervised recess, which route your babysitter took to pick you up. The message was clear: surrender custody voluntarily, or your daughter will have a tragic accident. My hands clenched on the paper, crumpling the edges. She'd given me up to save my life. The adoption I'd never questioned, the family I'd tried so hard to please, had all begun with my mother being threatened into surrender. I told myself it was temporary. The letter continued, and I could feel her desperation bleeding through every word. I thought if I agreed to their terms, signed the adoption papers, making them your legal guardians, it would buy me time to find another way. I had evidence of their threats, proof of their manipulation. I believed I could build a case, go to federal authorities, find someone they hadn't corrupted or intimidated. I thought I could win you back through legal channels. But she'd underestimated them, or perhaps she'd simply run out of time. The letter described her increasingly frantic attempts to gather evidence to find allies to build a case that would stand up in court. She'd documented everything: financial records, threatening messages, witnesses to their harassment. She'd hidden copies in safe deposit boxes with trusted lawyers and sealed envelopes with instructions to open them if anything happened to her. I never intended them to raise you permanently, Elena wrote, and the anguish in those words was palpable even 30 years later. The agreement was supposed to be protective custody until the threats against us could be neutralized. But they had no intention of ever giving you back. I see that now. They wanted access to your inheritance, to the trust fund that activates when you turn 40. They needed you alive, but under their control, raised, to never question your origins, groomed to trust them implicitly, so you'd never dig into the past. She'd figured it out too late. By the time she understood their true intentions, she'd already signed legal documents giving them custody. Breaking those agreements would have required proving they were obtained under duress, and she'd run out of time to gather sufficient evidence before they eliminated her. Now, reading her words in Marcus's fishing cabin with my arm still bandaged from my own near-death experience, I understood the full scope of their plan. They hadn't wanted a daughter. They'd wanted a financial instrument, a living key to unlock a fortune they could never directly access. The trust Elena had established was ironclad. Only I could claim it. Only I could authorize distributions, but only after reaching specific age milestones. At 40, I would gain complete control. But if I died before 40, the trust's provisions specified that my legal guardians, the people who'd raised me, would inherit as my closest family. They'd created a timeline: keep me alive until just before age 40, then eliminate me and claim the inheritance as grieving parents who'd raised an orphan out of the goodness of their hearts. Every cold interaction, every moment of calculated neglect, every time they'd made me feel like a burden suddenly made perfect sense. They'd never loved me because I was never supposed to be their daughter. I was an investment, a commodity, a problem to be managed until the optimal liquidation date. The childhood I'd agonized over, wondering what I'd done wrong to make them so cold, wondering how I could be better, more lovable, more worthy of their affection. None of it had ever been about me. They couldn't love me because I was a reminder of the fortune they were waiting to steal the woman they'd murdered, to get access to her child, the decades-long con they were perpetrating. I looked down at the final paragraph of Elena's letter. If you're reading this, I'm gone. But you're alive, and that means there's still hope. The trust is yours. Every protection I built into it was designed to keep them from accessing it until you were old enough to understand and fight back. Don't let my death be for nothing, my darling girl. Take what's yours, be free, and make them pay for what they've done. I whispered to the empty cabin to the ghost of a mother I'd never known. They didn't adopt me to give me a home. They adopted me to steal your fortune. Elena's letter had included one final instruction: check the safety deposit box at First Harbor Bank Box 247. The key is hidden in the lining of your old baby blanket, the blue one with white stars that I pray they kept for you. I didn't have that blanket. I'd never seen a blue blanket with white stars in my entire life. But the mention sent me digging through the digital files Elena's lawyers had provided access to documents that had been sitting in escrow for 30 years waiting for me to claim them. Among the scanned images was an inventory of items Elena had placed in that safety deposit box before her death. The list was short, but devastating: original birth certificates, family photographs, trust documents, and one sealed envelope marked, "For Erica's 35th birthday, the truth about Emma." Emma. The name appeared suddenly, unexpectedly, like a ghost materializing in the text. I stared at it, my heart beginning to race. Who was Emma? I contacted the bank using credentials Elena's lawyers provided, identifying myself as the beneficiary and sole heir to the Brooks estate. After 2 days of authentication procedures and legal verification, they finally agreed to scan and send the box's contents. When the encrypted files arrived on Marcus's tablet, my hands shook so badly I could barely open them. The first image was a photograph slightly faded but clear enough. 2 babies, perhaps 18 months old, sitting side by side in a wooden high chair. They were identical in every way: same dark curls, same brown eyes, same serious expressions as they clutched stuffed animals. And on both their left shoulders, visible where their onesies had slipped down, was the same distinctive birthmark I'd had my entire life, a small crescent-shaped mark that looked like a tiny moon. I pulled down the collar of the borrowed shirt Marcus had given me, twisting to see my shoulder. There it was, the birthmark I'd never thought about twice. The one that now stared back at me from a photograph of 2 identical babies. I flipped the photo over with trembling fingers. Written in Elena's handwriting, "Erica and Emma, age 2, my beautiful girls. My beautiful girls." Plural. The room spun. I had a sister, a twin sister. How had I never known? How had 30 years passed without anyone ever mentioning that I'd been born a twin? I tore through the other scanned documents with growing desperation, and there it was, a death certificate for Emma Marie Brooks. Date of death, June 15, 1995. Cause accidental drowning. Location, coastal waters off Harbor Point. The exact same waters where I'd been pushed 30 years later. The exact same location where Elena's body had been found after her car accident. The same stretch of ocean that Marcus said had swallowed more people than anyone knew. This wasn't coincidence. This was their signature, their dumping ground, their method of choice for eliminating the Brooks family one member at a time. I pulled up the full trust documents, next my business mind cutting through the legal language with practiced efficiency. What I found made the entire decades-long scheme finally snap into focus with horrible clarity. Elena had established the trust in 1993, 2 years before her death, dividing her considerable fortune equally between both daughters. Each girl would receive approximately $600 million when she turned 40. But Elena had included a standard survivorship clause: if one twin died before reaching maturity, her share would automatically transfer to the surviving sister. When Emma drowned in 1995, her $600 million merged with mine, creating the $1.2 billion trust I'd discovered. But there was more. Elena had been a tech industry pioneer in the early days of Silicon Valley, and much of the trust consisted of stock options in companies that had exploded in value over 3 decades. Companies I recognized: search engines, social media platforms, e-commerce giants. the kind of early investments that turned millions into billions. The documents showed projections. At age 40, when I gained full control, the trust would be worth an estimated $2 billion, maybe more depending on market conditions. But if the beneficiary died before reaching 40, the assets would pass to the legal guardians who'd raised her as their own child. The Newmans had spent 30 years playing the long game. They'd eliminated Emma first, consolidating the inheritance into a single target. Then they'd raised me, controlled me, kept me isolated, and questioning my own worth so I'd never dig into my past or ask uncomfortable questions. They'd waited patiently for me to approach 40, the age when I'd finally be able to claim what was mine. But they couldn't wait for me to actually reach 40 because at that point the money would be mine, free and clear. They needed me to die just before close enough that Emma's share had fully vested and transferred to me, but before I could take legal control and cut them out entirely. The yacht trip hadn't been random timing. I was 35 years old, just 5 years away from the final vesting date. Old enough that Emma's share was completely mine, young enough that I hadn't yet gained irrevocable control. I pulled up Emma's death certificate again, studying the details I'd initially skimmed. Age at death, 5 years old. The same age I'd been when I mysteriously appeared in the Newman family photographs with no explanation for my earlier years. The same age Elena had been forced to surrender me to their custody. The timeline reconstructed itself in my mind like a prosecution's case file. Elena, threatened and isolated, had given up custody of both daughters to keep them safe. But the Newmans never intended to keep both of us alive. Emma died within months of the custody transfer. Her death ruled an unfortunate accident despite happening in suspiciously familiar waters. With Emma gone, half the inheritance consolidated into my name. Then they'd eliminated Elena, making it look like a car accident, removing the only person who knew the truth and could fight to get me back. With Elena dead and Emma dead, I was the last remaining Brooks. An orphan with no memory of my real family, raised by the people who'd murdered everyone I should have loved. I thought about Emma, my twin sister I'd never known existed. Had she been scared when they took her out on that boat? Had she called for me for our mother? Or had she been too young to understand what was happening, still trusting the smiling adults who promised a fun day on the water? She'd drowned in the same ocean that had nearly killed me. The Newmans had tried the same method 3 decades apart, confident that what worked once would work again. They'd probably stood on the deck of their yacht watching my 5-year-old sister struggle in the water just as they'd watched me fall 30 years later. Marcus appeared in the doorway, took one look at my face, and asked quietly, "What did you find?" I looked up at him, this kind stranger who'd saved me from the same fate as my twin sister, and the truth poured out in a broken whisper. "They didn't just kill my sister. They've been planning to kill me since the day they murdered her." I was still staring at Emma's death certificate when Marcus's tablet chimed with an incoming message. The notification showed a sender I didn't recognize, EF Secure Communications. The subject line read simply, "We've been waiting for you, Erica Brooks." My finger hovered over the message, every instinct screaming caution. But whoever had sent this knew my real name, the one I'd only discovered days ago. I opened it. "Ms. Brooks, you don't know us, but we've known you since the day you were born. Your mother established the Elena Foundation in 1992 with explicit instructions to monitor and protect you. We've waited 30 years for this moment. Please call the number below. Use the encryption key attached. It's time we finally met." The message included a video file. Against my better judgment, I clicked it. The screen filled with an image of a woman in her late 60s sitting in what looked like a modern office. She had kind eyes and Elena's same determined jaw. "Hello, Erica," she said, her voice warm but businesslike. "My name is Dr. Margaret Chen. I was your mother's closest friend and the executor of her final wishes. If you're watching this, it means you've discovered the truth about your identity and you've survived an attempt on your life. I'm so sorry we couldn't intervene sooner, but Elena's instructions were explicit. We were to observe and document, but not reveal ourselves until you were 35 and actively in danger. She believed you needed to be old enough to handle the truth and strong enough to fight back. She also knew the Newmans would make their move around this time. She knew everything, Erica. And she prepared for all of it. I called the number with shaking hands. Dr. Chen answered on the first ring. "Ms. Brooks," she said, and the sound of my real name spoken with such certainty made my throat tight. "I'm glad you survived. We've been monitoring news reports, and when we saw the yacht incident, we mobilized immediately. Where are you?" "On a fishing boat off the coast," I said carefully. "How do I know you're really who you claim to be?" "You have a birthmark on your left shoulder shaped like a crescent moon," she replied without hesitation. "Your sister Emma had the same one. Your mother used to call you her moon babies. You were born at 3:47 a.m. on March 3, 1990, 7 minutes before Emma. Your father sang you Beatles songs at bedtime. Your favorite was Blackbird. And your mother's last written words to us were, 'Keep my daughter safe until she's ready to fly.'" The details were too specific, too intimate to be anything but real. I found myself crying without realizing I'd started. "We have so much to show you," Dr. Chen continued gently. "Your mother didn't just leave you money, Erica. She left you an army." Over the next hour, Dr. Chen explained the Elena Foundation's true purpose. On the surface, it was a legitimate charity helping women escape financial abuse and manipulation. But beneath that public mission was something else. A network of lawyers, investigators, and security professionals dedicated to a single task: protecting Elena Brooks's surviving daughter, until she was strong enough to reclaim her inheritance and destroy the people who'd murdered her family. "We've been watching you your entire life," Dr. Chen admitted. "I know how that must sound, but Elena was explicit. She wanted documentation of everything the Newmans did to you, knowing that someday you'd need evidence to fight them. We have decades of records, Erica. Everything." The files began arriving through encrypted channels. Medical records from when I was 8 and had pneumonia showing the Newmans had left me at the hospital for 3 days without visiting. Nutritional analyses from my adolescent years indicating I'd been chronically underfed given meals that met minimum caloric requirements, but were deliberately designed to keep me smaller and weaker than my peers. Scholarship records showing the Newmans had sabotaged my applications to fully funded programs, ensuring I'd remain financially dependent on them through college. There were psychological evaluations, too, conducted by Foundation-affiliated therapists who'd volunteered at my schools over the years. Report after report, noting signs of emotional neglect describing a child who tried desperately to please unpleasable parents, who internalized blame for coldness that wasn't her fault, who developed anxiety and self-doubt from systematic psychological manipulation. "Why didn't you intervene?" I asked, my voice breaking as I scrolled through documentation of my own suffering. "Why did you just watch if you knew what they were doing?" "Because Elena's instructions were absolute," Dr. Chen said, and I could hear the pain in her voice. "She knew that if we revealed ourselves too early, the Newmans would either eliminate you immediately or disappear with you somewhere we couldn't follow. She gambled that they'd keep you alive until you approached 40 because they needed you alive to access Emma's inherited share. She bet that by 35 you'd be accomplished enough, strong enough, and angry enough to fight back when you learned the truth. She believed in you, Erica. She believed you'd survive and become formidable." "She bet my entire childhood on that theory," I said bitterly. "She did," Dr. Chen agreed quietly. "And she hated herself for it. I was with her the week before she died, and she cried every night knowing what you'd go through. But she also knew that intervening too soon would get you killed. This was the only way she could see to give you a real chance at survival and justice. She sacrificed being your mother so that someday you could be free." The Foundation had legal specialists ready to file suits, criminal investigators with evidence to present to law enforcement, and security personnel prepared to keep me safe while the prosecution unfolded. They had 30 years of documentation proving the Newmans' systematic abuse. They had financial forensics showing how the family had manipulated adoption records, sealed court files, and corrupted investigations into both Elena's and Emma's deaths. Your mother's final message to us was recorded shortly before her death, Dr. Chen said. She predicted almost everything that's happened. She said, when my daughter turns 35, she'll need you. The Newmans will wait until she's close to 40, because that's when the full inheritance vests. They'll need her alive long enough to access Emma's share, but they'll kill her before she can claim legal control. When that attempt happens, reveal everything. Give her the resources to fight, and tell her I'm sorry I couldn't be there to fight alongside her. Elena had known. Somehow she'd predicted the timing, the method, the motivation. She'd understood the Newmans' greed and patience well enough to foresee their entire 30-year plan, and she'd countered it by building something that would outlive her, a foundation dedicated to protecting the daughter she'd been forced to surrender. We have resources you can't imagine, Dr. Chen continued. Legal funds, investigative teams, safe houses, security details. Everything your mother accumulated and everything we've built since her death is at your disposal. We're ready to help you take back what's yours and make sure the people who murdered your mother and sister finally pay for what they've done. I looked at Marcus, who'd been listening quietly to my half of the conversation. He gave me a small nod as if to say, trust them. I took a deep breath. What do we do first? Dr. Chen's voice carried grim satisfaction. First, we make sure you're completely safe. Then we start building the case that will destroy them. And finally, we make them face what they've done. Your mother waited 30 years for justice, Erica. Let's not make her wait any longer. With their help, my revenge didn't just seem possible. It became inevitable. Dr. Chen arranged for a secure video conference within the hour. When the encrypted connection established, I found myself looking at a screen divided into 6 panels, each showing a different Foundation team member. These were the people my mother had trusted with her final mission, and now they were mine. Welcome to the war room, Ms. Brooks, Dr. Chen said from the center panel. We've been preparing for this moment since 1995. Let's make it count. The woman in the top left panel spoke next, Dr. Sarah Lindholm, criminal psychologist and strategic planning specialist. Revenge is a dish best served systematically, she said, her Scandinavian accent clipped and precise. We've analyzed the Newman family psychology for 3 decades. They're motivated by greed, protected by social status, and sustained by their carefully curated public image. To destroy them, we dismantle all 3 pillars in sequence. Chaos creates opportunities for escape. Order creates inevitability. I leaned forward, my business mind immediately recognizing the logic. This was exactly how I'd approached hostile corporate takeovers: identify the support structures, eliminate them methodically, and watch the target collapse under its own weight. 3 phases. Dr. Chen continued, pulling up a detailed presentation. Financial destruction first, because money is their primary motivation and their source of power. Without financial resources, they can't hire expensive lawyers, maintain their lifestyle, or buy the influence that's protected them for decades. Public exposure second, because their social status depends on reputation. Once we've damaged that, they lose the community support that's kept questions about Elena and Emma's deaths from being asked. Legal prosecution third, when they're financially broken and socially isolated, making conviction not just possible, but probable. The plan was elegant in its brutality. Each phase would create conditions that made the next phase more effective. And critically, each phase was designed to be irreversible. Once we triggered the sequence, there would be no way for the Newmans to stop what was coming. Phase 1 launches first, said Marcus Rivera, the Foundation's financial forensics specialist, appearing in the bottom right panel. We've spent years documenting their fraudulent activities. They've taken loans using Erica's trust as collateral without her knowledge or consent. They've established accounts in her name, forged signatures on financial documents, and committed systematic identity theft on a massive scale. We have every transaction documented, authenticated, and ready to present to regulatory authorities. He pulled up spreadsheets that made my head spin. Millions of dollars in fraudulent transactions, all meticulously traced and verified. The Newmans had been living off my mother's fortune for 30 years, using my identity as a skeleton key to access funds they had no legal right to touch. We'll file simultaneous reports with the IRS, SEC, and FBI, Marcus continued. By the time they wake up tomorrow morning, every account will be frozen pending investigation. The mansion they're living in was purchased with a loan secured against your trust. The bank will initiate foreclosure procedures within 48 hours. Their credit cards, investment accounts, everything tied to fraudulent use of your identity will be locked down. They'll go from wealthy to effectively bankrupt in less than a day. Phase 2 follows immediately, added Jennifer Walsh, former investigative journalist and current Foundation Media Relations Director. While they're reeling from financial collapse, we release carefully curated documents to major news outlets. Internal emails discussing your elimination financial records, showing decades of fraud, and most damaging, will raise questions about Elena and Emma's deaths. Anonymous tips to journalists known for investigative work on cold cases. Leaked documents to true crime podcasters. Strategic information releases that make it impossible for mainstream media to ignore the story. She smiled grimly. The Newmans have cultivated an image as philanthropic socialites. We're going to expose them as the murderous frauds they are. And we'll do it in a way that makes them newsworthy enough that they can't hide but can't effectively defend themselves without incriminating themselves further. Every statement they make will be analyzed, every inconsistency highlighted, every lie exposed. The court of public opinion will convict them before they ever see the inside of a courtroom. And Phase 3, Dr. Chen said softly, is your resurrection. When they're financially destroyed and publicly exposed, when they're desperate and cornered and certain they've gotten away with killing you, that's when you return. Not as Erica Newman, the daughter they raised, but as Erica Brooks, the woman they tried to murder to steal her mother's fortune. The final panel showed a courtroom rendering. You'll appear before a federal judge with every piece of evidence we've gathered over 30 years, Dr. Chen continued. DNA proof of your true identity, documentation of the adoption fraud evidence of Elena and Emma's murders, and irrefutable proof of their attempt to kill you. The media will already be primed by Phase 2, so your appearance will be a national sensation. The daughter who supposedly drowned rising from the grave to bring justice for her murdered family. I sat back overwhelmed by the scope and sophistication of what they'd planned. This wasn't revenge, it was a precisely orchestrated prosecution, a strategic dismantling of everything the Newmans had built on my family's graves. How long until we can begin? I asked. Dr. Chen checked her watch. The financial reports are ready to file. Media packages are prepared. Legal documents are drafted and authenticated. We can launch Phase 1 within 6 hours if you give the authorization. One thing, I said, thinking of Emma drowning in those dark waters of my mother's desperate letter of 30 years stolen from me. I want them to know it's me, not immediately, but before the end. I want them to understand that every horrible thing happening to them is because I survived, because they underestimated exactly how much my mother loved me and how far she'd go to protect me even after death. We can arrange that, Jennifer said with a satisfied smile. A photo perhaps delivered at precisely the right moment to maximize psychological impact. I touched the bandage on my arm, feeling the raised scar tissue beneath. I know exactly what photo to send. Dr. Chen's expression was fierce with approval. Then let's begin. Erica Brooks, it's time to take back everything they stole and make them pay for every crime they've committed. I looked at each face on the screen, these strangers who'd been watching over me my entire life, waiting for this moment. My mother's army finally mobilized after 3 decades of patient preparation. She'd built all of this set, all of these pieces in motion, betting that I'd survive long enough to lead them into battle. Phase 1 begins tonight, I said, my voice steady with purpose. And they have no idea what's coming. Marcus Rivera worked through the night finalizing the documentation for regulatory authorities. I watched from a Foundation safe house as he compiled 30 years of evidence into packages designed for maximum impact. Each report was a masterpiece of forensic accounting, presenting complex fraud in language that even non-specialists could understand. The beauty of this approach, Marcus explained as he encrypted the final files, is that we're not making accusations. We're simply presenting documented transactions that violate federal law. The agencies have no choice but to investigate. And once they start pulling on these threads, the entire tapestry unravels. At precisely 6:00 a.m. Eastern Time, the reports went out simultaneously. IRS Criminal Investigation Division received documentation of tax fraud spanning 3 decades. The SEC got evidence of investment fraud and identity theft in securities accounts. The FBI's Financial Crimes Unit received proof of wire fraud, bank fraud, and conspiracy. Each package was comprehensive, cross-referenced, and undeniable. The Foundation had people monitoring Newman family communications through legal channels, phone metadata, credit card transactions, public records updates. I watched in real time as their world began collapsing. At 8:47 a.m., the stepmother's platinum credit card was declined at her favorite boutique. She tried 3 more cards. All declined. According to the Foundation's contact at the credit card company, she'd called customer service and been informed that her accounts were frozen, pending a federal investigation. The call lasted 17 minutes and ended with her screaming obscenities before hanging up. By 10:15 a.m., their primary bank accounts were locked. My father had apparently tried to withdraw cash and been told by the bank manager that all accounts associated with his Social Security number were under federal hold. The Foundation's banking contact reported he'd simply nodded, thanked the manager politely, and walked out. No protests, no questions. As if he'd been expecting this moment for years. At 11:30 a.m., their investment portfolios were frozen by the SEC. Millions of dollars in stocks, bonds, and mutual funds, all purchased with fraudulent loans using my identity, suddenly became inaccessible. Their financial advisor called the house 6 times before anyone answered. And when they did, the shouting could be heard clearly through the phone according to Foundation surveillance. By 2:00 p.m., the real devastation hit. The bank that held the mortgage on their estate, a sprawling property in an exclusive neighborhood worth at least $8 million, delivered foreclosure papers. The mortgage had been secured using my trust fund as collateral documents, signed with forged versions of my signature. With the fraud exposed and my accounts frozen, the bank was within its rights to demand immediate repayment of the full loan amount. When that payment didn't materialize within the required time frame, foreclosure proceedings began automatically. Jennifer Walsh had a contact at a local news station who happened to drive past the Newman estate that afternoon. Her description came through the Foundation's communication channel. The stepmother is on the front lawn throwing what appears to be a complete breakdown. She's screaming at the bank representatives, at the staff, at anyone within earshot. Neighbors are watching from their yards. This is not a good look for the former queen of charitable society events. The Foundation had installed monitoring equipment near the property years ago, all perfectly legal surveillance of public spaces. Through those channels, I could hear fragments of my stepmother's rage. She was screaming about conspiracies, about incompetent bankers, about the unfairness of being targeted. Never once did she consider that maybe, just maybe, she was facing consequences for 3 decades of criminal activity. My father remained eerily silent through it all. Foundation observers reported he'd locked himself in his study, sitting in the dark, not responding when the stepmother pounded on the door demanding he fix this. His silence was more telling than any panic could have been. He'd known this was coming. Perhaps not the specifics, but certainly the inevitability. You can't live with murder and fraud for 30 years without understanding that someday, somehow, there will be a reckoning. By evening, the fractures in the family became impossible to hide. Melissa had been scheduled to speak at a charity luncheon for an organization where she held a board position. That morning, she'd received a terse email informing her she was being removed from the board, effective immediately, due to financial irregularities in her personal accounts that create liability concerns for the organization. The Foundation's media monitoring showed Melissa had immediately called Felix, her boyfriend of 6 months. The conversation, captured through legal phone metadata analysis, lasted 43 minutes. According to patterns in her subsequent calls, she'd accused him of leaking information about her family, of betraying confidences, of being part of some conspiracy against them. Felix had apparently hung up on her. She'd called back 17 times. He never answered. The family group chat that evening was a masterclass in dysfunction. The Foundation's cyber team, operating within legal bounds, tracked the timing and frequency of messages even if they couldn't access content. The pattern told the story: the stepmother sending long messages every few minutes, Melissa responding in bursts, my father sending nothing at all. A family united by greed and murder was disintegrating the moment their money disappeared. They had no resources to hire expensive lawyers who might delay the inevitable. They had no influence to call in favors from powerful friends who'd suddenly stopped answering their calls. They had nothing but fear and accusations, and the dawning realization that someone was systematically destroying them. But they still didn't know who. They still thought I was dead, rotting at the bottom of the ocean, my body food for the sharks, Melissa had mentioned in those final moments on the yacht. I sat in the Foundation's safe house watching their world crumble through surveillance reports and media coverage, and felt nothing but cold satisfaction. This was justice, methodical and merciless. This was what my mother had planned for what she'd spent her final months orchestrating. Dr. Chen entered the room with a knowing smile. Phase 1 is complete. They're financially destroyed, publicly humiliated, and turning on each other. Phase 2 launches in the morning with media leaks. But first, I believe you wanted to send them a message. I held up my left arm where the scar from the ocean debris ran from elbow to wrist, a permanent reminder of the night they'd tried to erase me from existence. The Foundation's photographer had captured it perfectly, my hand against a dark background, the scar tissue raised and obvious healing, but unmistakable. Send it to all 3 of them, I said. No message, just the photo. Let them figure out what it means. The image was delivered via untraceable digital channels to their personal phones at exactly 11:47 p.m., the same time they'd pushed me off the yacht 5 days earlier. I imagined them staring at their screens, seeing that scar, understanding with creeping horror that somewhere, somehow I had survived. And then I sent the photo, my hand showing the scar from the ocean they left me in. The invitation arrived at the Newman residence on elegant cream cardstock, delivered by courier 3 days after I'd sent them the photo of my scar. The Elena Foundation had organized it perfectly, a legitimate charitable event honoring victims of maritime tragedies scheduled at the Harbor Point Grand Ballroom, with expected attendance of over 300 people, including local media prominent donors and community leaders. The Newman family is cordially invited to attend as honored guests. The invitation read, in memory of their beloved daughter, Erica Newman, lost to the sea. Your presence would bring comfort to other families who have experienced similar tragedy. According to Foundation surveillance, the stepmother had thrown the invitation across the room when she first read it. But within an hour, their new lawyer, a public defender type they could barely afford after Phase 1 destroyed their finances, had called to strongly advise attendance. Refusing would look suspicious, especially given the financial scandal already making local news. A grieving family wouldn't avoid a memorial service for their own daughter. Staying away would raise questions they couldn't afford to answer. They had no choice but to come and perform their grief for an audience. The Foundation had spared no expense, making the event appear completely legitimate. The ballroom was decorated with ocean-themed memorial displays, photos of various victims from maritime accidents spanning decades, and tables covered in white linens, with centerpieces of blue hydrangeas. A string quartet played softly in the corner. Catering staff circulated with champagne and hors d'oeuvres. Everything looked exactly like what it claimed to be a tasteful, respectful memorial service, except it was also a trap. I arrived early, dressed in a simple black dress and wearing a wide-brimmed hat with a veil that partially obscured my face. Sunglasses completed the disguise. I looked like any other mourner, anonymous in grief. I took a seat in the back row, partially hidden by a decorative column where I could observe everything without being obvious. The guests began arriving. I recognized several faces from news coverage families who genuinely lost loved ones at sea, advocates for maritime safety, Coast Guard representatives. Real people with real grief, which made the Newmans' performance all the more obscene by comparison. They arrived 20 minutes after the official start time, late enough to make an entrance. My stepmother had clearly tried to maintain her usual polished designer black dress, Pearl's professionally styled hair, but the cracks were visible. Her makeup couldn't quite hide the dark circles under her eyes. Her smile was brittle, forced. Melissa looked worse. She'd lost weight, her dress hanging loose on a frame that had always been carefully maintained. Her eyes darted around the room constantly, never settling, searching every face for hidden threats. When someone offered condolences, she flinched before remembering to play her role. My father looked like a ghost already. He moved stiffly, mechanically, saying nothing, while the stepmother accepted sympathies with practiced grace. His eyes were flat dead, seeing nothing. They were seated in the front row positions of honor for the grieving family. A large photograph of me taken from my company website was displayed on an easel nearby with a placard reading, "Erica Newman, 1990-2025, beloved daughter and visionary leader." The irony of that word beloved wasn't lost on me. The service began with speeches about maritime safety, about cherishing the memories of those lost, about finding comfort in community. The Newmans sat rigid, playing their parts. The stepmother dabbed at dry eyes with a handkerchief. Melissa's jaw was clenched so tight I could see the muscle jumping from across the room. Then came the portion of the program that made my pulse quicken. Event coordinators, all foundation members playing their roles perfectly, began distributing envelopes to select attendees. "Personal letters from families of victims," the coordinator announced, sharing memories and messages of hope. The envelopes were hand-delivered to several guests throughout the ballroom. Most contained genuine letters from real families. But 3 envelopes, carefully prepared by the foundation, went to 3 specific people in the front row. Melissa opened hers first. I watched her hands shake as she unfolded the paper inside. Her face went white. The photograph of my scarred hand was mounted on simple cardstock with a single line beneath it. "From the ocean you left me in." She made a small, strangled sound that she tried to cover with a cough. Her head whipped around, scanning the crowd with wild eyes, searching for whoever had sent this. The stepmother opened hers more slowly, as if already suspecting what she'd find. Inside were photocopies of her own emails, the ones discussing my elimination, the ones planning the timing, the ones calculating how to access my inheritance after my death. Her hands began trembling so violently she nearly dropped the papers. She shoved them back into the envelope quickly, but not before I saw her face drain of all color. My father's envelope sat unopened in his lap for several minutes. He stared at it like it might contain a bomb. Finally, with the mechanical movements of a man already defeated, he opened it. Inside was a photograph I'd never seen before: Emma at age 5, smiling at the camera in a yellow dress, standing on what looked like a dock, the same dock where they kept their yacht. And beneath it, in my handwriting, "You let them kill her. Now they tried to kill me." He closed his eyes. That was his only reaction. Just closed his eyes and sat perfectly still, as if by not moving he could make this all disappear. Around them, the memorial service continued. People spoke about resilience and healing. The string quartet played something mournful and beautiful. Servers refilled champagne glasses. Everyone maintained the illusion of a tasteful charitable event. But in the front row, the Newman family was disintegrating. The stepmother's hands shook as she gripped her clutch bag so tightly her knuckles went white. Melissa's breathing was rapid and shallow, her eyes still darting around the room in paranoid desperation. My father sat like a statue, his envelope clutched in motionless hands. They were trapped. They couldn't leave without causing a scene. They couldn't react without explaining why these particular letters had disturbed them so deeply. They were forced to sit there surrounded by 300 witnesses accepting condolences for my death, while holding evidence that I'd somehow survived. I watched them from my seat in the back, hidden behind my veil and sunglasses. I saw the exact moment the stepmother's composure truly cracked, when a well-meaning society friend approached to offer sympathy, and she had to smile and accept an embrace while the incriminating emails sat in her lap. I saw Melissa's panic when a photographer approached to document the grieving family, forcing her to compose her face into something resembling sorrow, while terror danced behind her eyes. And I saw my father finally turn in his seat and look directly at where I was sitting. Our eyes met across the crowded ballroom. He couldn't possibly recognize me through the disguise, couldn't possibly know I was there. But something in his expression said he understood anyway. Understood that justice had found him, that his daughter, whichever daughter it didn't matter anymore, had come for him at last. The service ended. Guests mingled, offering final condolences. The Newmans were trapped in a receiving line of sympathy they couldn't escape. I watched them perform their grief for another hour before I slipped out through a side exit, my presence undetected by everyone except possibly my father, who'd already given up hoping for mercy. They thought they were mourning me, but I was there watching them mourn themselves. Phase 2 launched exactly 48 hours after the memorial service, timed perfectly to catch the Newman family at their most psychologically vulnerable. Jennifer Walsh had spent weeks cultivating relationships with investigative journalists at major outlets, building trust, establishing credibility. When she finally delivered the story, she didn't need to sell it. The evidence sold itself. The first article dropped at 6:00 a.m. on a Monday morning in the Washington Post. Questions surround tech billionaire's disappearance. Family emails suggest foul play. Within the first 3 paragraphs, they'd published excerpts from the stepmother's emails, including the damning line, "We need to act before Erica turns 35 and starts asking questions about the inheritance." By 7:30 a.m., every major news network had picked up the story. CNN ran a segment with a former prosecutor analyzing the emails and flatly stating, "This language doesn't suggest concern for a missing person. This suggests premeditation." MSNBC brought in a forensic psychologist who described the family dynamics as classic financial predation, with potential escalation to violence. The foundation had provided carefully curated packages to select journalists enough information to make the story explosive, but not so much that it would compromise future legal proceedings. Internal family communications discussing how to divide assets after the death, references to removing me from the financial picture permanently, and most damaging, a text exchange between Melissa and the stepmother 2 days before the yacht trip. "Is everything ready for Saturday?" "Yes. No life vests, remote location, perfect weather forecast." Jennifer monitored the media response from the Foundation's command center, a satisfied smile on her face as she tracked the story's viral spread. "It's exceeding projections," she reported. "We're trending #1 on social media. The hashtag #JusticeForErica has over 2 million mentions, and the Newman family's phones are being destroyed by press calls." I watched the news coverage from my safe house, seeing my own face plastered across every screen. They were using my corporate headshot, the one where I looked confident and accomplished everything the Newmans had tried to prevent me from becoming. The irony was exquisite. By noon, the story had evolved beyond simple reporting into full investigative mode. A podcast specializing in cold cases announced a special multi-part series examining Elena Brooks's death in 1995 and drawing parallels to my disappearance. "Same family, same location, 30 years apart," the host said dramatically. "What are the odds of that being coincidence?" The Foundation had anonymously provided that podcast with just enough breadcrumbs to make them feel like they'd discovered the connection themselves. Within hours, they'd unearthed Emma's death certificate, interviewed Marcus the fisherman who remembered Elena's drowning, and started asking very uncomfortable questions about how the Newman family seemed to be connected to multiple suspicious deaths in the same coastal waters. The FBI contacted the Newman family on Monday afternoon. According to Foundation surveillance, 3 agents arrived at their home, which they were still occupying despite foreclosure proceedings, and requested voluntary cooperation with an investigation. The Newmans' public defender had advised them to decline interrogation without better legal representation, but they couldn't afford better legal representation. They were trapped between appearing cooperative and avoiding self-incrimination. They chose cooperation, which was exactly what the Foundation had predicted. Desperate people make desperate choices. The interrogations began Tuesday morning. The Foundation had no direct access to what was said inside the FBI field office, but we had sources who could track timing, observe body language when the family members emerged, and note which agents were assigned to the case. The lead investigator was Special Agent Carol Torres, a woman known for her work on complex financial crimes with violent components. Her assignment to this case was not a good sign for the Newmans. After the first round of interviews, the FBI's Public Affairs Office released a terse statement. "We are investigating the disappearance of Erica Newman and examining evidence of potential foul play. The investigation is active and ongoing." That single word, potential, was enough to send the media into another frenzy. The Newmans were summoned back Wednesday, then Thursday, then Friday. With each interrogation, Foundation observers noted increasing signs of stress. The stepmother emerged from Thursday's session with mascara-streaked cheeks. Melissa was seen arguing with her parents in the FBI parking lot, their raised voices audible to anyone nearby. My father walked out Friday looking 20 years older than when he'd entered. And then the leaks began. Someone inside the investigation, not Foundation-affiliated, just a standard leak that happens in high-profile cases, told reporters that the family members' stories weren't aligning. The stepmother claimed I'd fallen overboard while taking photos. Melissa said I'd been leaning over the railing to look at dolphins. My father said I'd gone to the rear deck alone, and he hadn't seen what happened. 3 different versions of the same incident, none of them compatible. Every discrepancy was reported, analyzed, and added to the mounting evidence of guilt in the public's mind. But it was Melissa who became the focal point of media obsession. Someone leaked one specific email to a tabloid outlet, and it spread like wildfire. Melissa writing to her mother 3 days before the yacht trip. "She won't survive long out there. The sharks are hungry this time of year." The phrasing was so callous, so calculated, that it became the defining quote of the entire scandal. Within 24 hours, Melissa's face was everywhere, not as the grieving sister, but as the cold-blooded killer. Her social media accounts, which she'd locked down too late, were screenshotted and dissected. Old photos of her at charity events were recontextualized as evidence of her narcissism. Ex-boyfriends came forward with stories about her explosive temper and obsession with wealth. She lost her remaining board position at a children's literacy foundation after donors threatened to pull funding if she remained associated with the organization. Former friends posted statements on social media distancing themselves from her. Someone created a petition demanding she be arrested immediately, and it gathered 300,000 signatures in 2 days. The stepmother and father attempted damage control through a hastily arranged interview with a local news station, but it backfired spectacularly. The stepmother came across as cold and defensive, insisting they were victims of a witch hunt, while offering no actual explanation for the incriminating evidence. My father sat silent throughout most of the interview, only speaking when directly asked questions, his answers monosyllabic and unconvincing. Legal experts watching the interview were unanimous in their assessment. These were not the reactions of innocent people being wrongly accused. These were the reactions of guilty people watching their carefully constructed lies collapse. The Foundation monitored it all, documenting every article, every broadcast, every social media post. The court of public opinion had rendered its verdict: the Newman family had murdered me for money. Now it was just a matter of time before the actual courts reached the same conclusion. But through it all, the Newmans still didn't know the truth. They thought they were being destroyed by anonymous whistleblowers, by investigative journalists doing their jobs by bad luck and coincidence, turning against them. They still didn't know the ghost destroying their lives was me. The Foundation's legal team worked with military precision, assembling what Dr. Chen called the most comprehensive evidence package in modern inheritance fraud history. I spent 12 hours a day reviewing documents in a secure room at their headquarters, checking every detail, verifying every source, ensuring nothing could be challenged or dismissed. My birth certificate, the original, showed Elena Marie Brooks as mother and David Arthur Brooks as father. The hospital records from March 3, 1990 documented twin girls born at Harbor General Medical Center, both healthy, both discharged 4 days later with their mother. Dr. Patricia Morrison, who'd delivered us, was still alive and willing to testify. She remembered Elena, remembered the twins, remembered that one of those babies had a distinctive birthmark on her left shoulder. The DNA results were irrefutable. The Foundation had obtained genetic samples from Elena's preserved medical records and compared them to my blood. The analysis showed a 99.97% probability of maternal relationship. Simultaneously, DNA comparison with archived samples from the Newman family showed 0 genetic markers in common. I was not related to them by blood, not even distantly. The science was absolute and inarguable. The security footage from the marina was time-stamped and authenticated by 3 independent forensic video analysts. You could clearly see my father removing life vests, the stepmother checking items off a list, Melissa disposing of the safety equipment in a marina dumpster. The Foundation had even tracked down the marina worker who'd later retrieved those vests from the dumpster, wondering why anyone would throw away perfectly good safety equipment. He'd kept them in his garage for years, and now they sat in evidence lockup, tagged and catalogued. Elena's letter, subjected to handwriting analysis and paper dating, was authenticated as genuinely written by her in the weeks before her death. Forensic document examiners confirmed the ink, paper, and writing implement were all consistent with 1995 origin. The content was devastating, but more importantly, it was provably real. The financial documents showed 30 years of systematic fraud, forged signatures on loan applications, falsified trust beneficiary claims, identity theft on a scale that made the forensic accountants whistle in amazement. Marcus Rivera had traced every fraudulent dollar, documented every illegal transaction, and created visual presentations that even a jury of non-financial experts could understand. I reviewed it all obsessively late into each night, looking for weaknesses, anticipating defenses, preparing for every possible challenge. This wasn't just about winning in court. This was about making my case so overwhelming, so complete, so undeniable that the Newmans would have nowhere to hide, no explanation to offer, no reasonable doubt to exploit. But the evidence preparation, as consuming as it was, represented only half of my work. I also needed to prepare myself for what was coming the moment I would step into public view and transform from dead victim to living accuser. The Foundation arranged a safe house in Montana, a remote cabin accessible only by private roads surrounded by forest and mountains. It was there I went to complete my final preparations, away from the media storm swirling around the Newman family, away from any possibility of premature discovery. I spent my days writing and rewriting the statement I would deliver when I returned. The words needed to be perfect, clear enough for public understanding, powerful enough to convey 3 decades of injustice, measured enough not to sound hysterical or vindictive. I practiced in front of the mirror, watching my expressions, controlling my voice, ensuring that when the moment came, I would appear calm, credible, and absolutely certain. I anticipated hostile questions from reporters who might be sympathetic to the Newmans or simply skeptical of such an extraordinary claim. Why had I waited so long to come forward? Where had I been? Why not go directly to police instead of orchestrating this elaborate public campaign? I prepared answers for everything, truthful but strategic, designed to maintain control of the narrative. The isolation gave me time to think, perhaps too much time. At night, alone in the cabin with only the wind in the pines for company, unexpected emotions surfaced. Grief which seemed absurd given what the Newmans had done. But the grief wasn't for who they actually were, it was for who I desperately wanted them to be. For 30 years I'd loved those people. I'd tried so hard to earn their approval, to be worthy of their affection, to become someone they could be proud of. Every business success had been partly motivated by the hope that this time, maybe this achievement would finally make them see my worth. Every time I'd called home, part of me had hoped to hear warmth in their voices, instead of the usual cold distance. Even knowing now that it was all a lie, that they'd never been my family at all, some wounded part of me mourned the loss of the fantasy I'd clung to. I grieved the childhood I should have had, the mother who died trying to protect me, the sister I'd never known existed. I grieved 30 years of trying to love people who'd been planning my murder since I was 5 years old. This unexpected grief made me examine my motivations carefully. Was I seeking justice or revenge? Was this about protecting my mother's legacy or satisfying my own anger? The distinction mattered. Revenge would make me cruel, would tempt me to inflict unnecessary suffering, would turn me into someone my mother wouldn't recognize. Justice was different. Justice meant ensuring they faced consequences proportional to their crimes. Justice meant preventing them from ever doing this to anyone else. Justice meant honoring Elena and Emma by refusing to let their deaths remain buried lies. I decided that my justice would be thorough but not sadistic. I would present the evidence and let the system work. I would tell the truth and let others judge. I would be strong enough to confront them, but wise enough not to become them. My mother had fought to make me better than the people who killed her. I wouldn't dishonor that sacrifice by descending to their level. On my final night in the Montana cabin, I felt ready. The evidence was perfect. My statement was prepared. My resolve was absolute. Tomorrow, I would return to civilization, meet with the Foundation team, and finalize the timeline for my public return. Phase 3 would begin within the week. I was reviewing the documents one last time when headlights appeared on the private road. No one knew I was here except the Foundation, and they would have called first. I moved to the window, staying back from the glass, and watched as a car approached slowly, its engine laboring up the mountain grade. The car stopped. A single figure emerged, moving with the stiff, careful motions of someone much older than their actual years. Even in the darkness, even from a distance, I recognized the way he held himself. My father had found me. But just as I finalized my plans, Dad found me first. I had a security system on the cabin, motion sensors, cameras, a direct line to Foundation security who could arrive within 20 minutes. My hand hovered over the panic button as I watched my father approach the porch. He moved like a man decades older than his 62 years, each step deliberate and effortful, as if his body had forgotten how to function properly. He knocked softly, 3 careful taps that somehow conveyed defeat. I opened the door with my phone in hand, Foundation security already on the line listening. "Erica," he said, and his voice cracked on my name. "Please, I need to talk to you. Just talk. I'm not here to hurt you. I couldn't hurt you. I never could." He looked terrible. The man I remembered, always impeccably dressed and precisely groomed, had been replaced by this gaunt stranger. His clothes hung loose on a frame that had lost significant weight. His hair, previously salt and pepper distinguished, had gone completely white. But it was his eyes that shocked me most. Hollow, haunted, carrying the weight of unbearable knowledge. "How did you find me?" I asked, not lowering the phone. "I've always known how to find you," he said quietly. "I've been tracking you since you were 5 years old. Not for them, for me. So I could know you were still alive, still safe, even when I couldn't protect you." Against every instinct of self-preservation, I let him inside. Foundation security continued listening through my phone as I positioned myself between my father and the door, maintaining an escape route. He collapsed into a chair without being invited, his movements uncoordinated. "I know what you're planning," he said. "The evidence packages, the public revelation, the prosecution. You should do it. You should destroy us. We deserve it." "Then why are you here?" "Because before you do, you deserve to know the whole truth. Not just what they did, but what I did. What I failed to do." He looked at his hands, which trembled continuously. "I've known you weren't my biological daughter since the day Elena died. Your moth, my wife, showed me the adoption papers. The forged documents explained the whole scheme. She and Melissa had planned it together. I was just supposed to go along." "And you did," I said, my voice flat. "I did." He acknowledged the words barely above a whisper. "I was weak. I am weak. I told myself I was trapped, that they'd threatened me, that I had no choice. But the truth is simpler and more pathetic than that. I was a coward. I watched them treat you horribly, watched you try so hard to earn love they'd never give, and I did nothing because doing something would have required courage I didn't have." He pulled a pill bottle from his pocket, his hands shaking so badly he could barely open it. "Progressive neurological disease," he explained, taking 2 pills dry. diagnosed 4 years ago, early onset dementia with motor dysfunction. I'm losing myself piece by piece, and they've been using it against me for years. I watched him struggle with the pill bottle, remembering how steady his hands used to be. What do you mean using it? Melissa, mostly. She figured out early that I couldn't always remember what I'd signed or agreed to. She'd put documents in front of me during my bad periods, the times when my mind is foggy and I can barely track conversations, and I'd sign whatever she told me to sign. The death certificate preparations, the insurance claims, the financial documents. She'd tell me it was for estate planning, for tax purposes, for legal compliance. And in my confusion, I'd believe her. He met my eyes, and I saw genuine anguish there. I'm not asking you to forgive that. I'm not even asking you to believe it. I'm just telling you what happened. There were moments of clarity when I understood exactly what they were planning, when I knew I should run to the police or grab you and disappear. But by then, I was so deep in it, so complicit, and the disease was making me question my own memories. Was I really understanding correctly? Was I misinterpreting? Was this the disease making me paranoid? You were on that yacht, I said, my voice hard. You saw Melissa push me. You turned your back. I tried to save you, he said, and tears began running down his face. The second you went over, I moved toward the railing to jump in after you. But Melissa grabbed me physically, held me back. She's stronger than she looks, and I'm weaker than I used to be. She whispered in my ear while you were drowning. If you go in after her, I'll tell everyone you pushed her. I'll say you finally snapped, that you've been unstable, that the disease made you violent. Who do you think they'll believe? He was sobbing now, his whole body shaking. I was terrified. Of her, of my wife, of what they'd do if I tried to stop them. So I turned away. I let them sail away while you drowned, and I've been dying inside every moment since, knowing I failed you when you needed me most. I wanted to feel nothing but contempt. He deserved contempt. But something in his broken confession rang true in a way that mere manipulation wouldn't have. If you were so powerless, I asked, how did I find all those breadcrumbs, the digital trail to the trust account, the security footage, Elena's letter? His expression changed, showing something almost like pride through the despair. Because even a coward can do small brave things when no one's watching. I couldn't fight them openly, but I could sabotage them quietly. The offshore account Elena set up, I made sure your social security number was linked to it in databases I knew you'd eventually search when you built your tech company. The security footage, Melissa ordered me to delete it. I told her I had, but I'd only archived it under an administrative code I knew would come up if anyone officially investigated. Elena's letter. Your mother gave it to me before she died, made me promise to make sure you got it. I couldn't deliver it directly, but I hid it where it would eventually reach you. He leaned forward, his eyes desperate for me to understand. I've spent 30 years leaving you clues, creating fail-safes, ensuring that if you survived long enough, you'd have the evidence to destroy us. It's not redemption. It doesn't make up for my cowardice. But it's something. It's the only thing I could do. Why? I asked. Why help me at all if you were so afraid of them? Because you're not just Elena's daughter, he said softly. For a brief time when you were very small, before I understood what they were planning, I loved you like you were mine. I told myself that when the court sorted everything out, when Elena got you back legally, at least I'd have given you a safe place to stay for those few months. Then they killed Elena, and suddenly you were trapped, and I was trapped with you, and I watched 30 years go by while I failed you every single day. He stood with difficulty, steadying himself against the chair. I'm not here to ask forgiveness. I'm here to tell you that every piece of evidence you've found, I helped you find. I'm here to tell you that when you bring this case to court, I'll testify against them, against myself. I'll tell them everything. The murder plots, the financial fraud, Emma's death, Elena's death, all of it. I'll make sure they can't escape justice, even if it means I spend whatever time I have left in prison. He moved toward the door, then paused. You asked me on the yacht why I looked so afraid. I was afraid because I knew what they were going to do, and I knew I was too weak to stop them. and I knew that if you died, the last 30 years of my pathetic half-measures would mean nothing. I was afraid I'd failed you completely." "You did fail me," I said. "I know," he replied. "But you survived anyway. You're stronger than all of us, stronger than the disease and the poison they raised you in. Elena would be so proud of who you became despite everything we did to you." He left without waiting for a response, climbing into his car and disappearing down the mountain road. I stood in the doorway long after his taillights vanished, trying to process what I'd just heard. The Foundation security team was already discussing whether this was manipulation, whether he could be trusted, whether he'd led others to my location. But I was thinking about something else, about the digital breadcrumbs I'd followed, about how each clue had appeared at exactly the right moment, about patterns that seemed almost too convenient to be accidental. He wasn't my enemy, I realized with strange clarity. He was something more complicated and more tragic than that. He wasn't my enemy. He was my silent guardian who failed to be my hero. My father's visit had shaken me more than I wanted to admit, but I had no time to process the emotional complexity of his confession. The Foundation's alert system chimed urgently on my phone just 12 hours after he'd left Melissa, had called an emergency press conference, and it was about to go live. I watched from the Montana cabin as my sister, no, not my sister, never my sister, appeared before a wall of cameras looking like a portrait of devastated innocence. She'd clearly spent hours on her appearance, calculating every detail. Her makeup was expertly applied to look natural, but tear-streaked mascara carefully smudged just enough to suggest hours of crying. She wore a simple black dress with a delicate cross necklace that I'd never seen her wear before, a prop meant to evoke sympathy and suggest religious faith. Her hair was pulled back in a style that made her look younger, more vulnerable. "Thank you all for coming," she began, her voice trembling convincingly. "I know there have been terrible rumors and accusations flying around about my family. I'm here today to tell you the truth about what we're going through." She paused, pressing a tissue to her eyes. The tissue was clearly dry, but the gesture was effective. Several cameras zoomed in on her face, capturing what looked like genuine anguish. "My sister Erica died 3 weeks ago." Melissa continued, her voice breaking on the word died. "She fell from our family yacht during what was supposed to be a healing trip, a chance to reconnect after years of her being consumed by work. Losing her has destroyed us. She was brilliant, accomplished, and we were so proud of her." I almost laughed at that blatant lie, but the anger rising in my chest choked off any humor. "But our grief has been hijacked by someone with cruel intentions." Melissa went on, her tone shifting to righteous indignation. "For the past 2 weeks, someone has been sending us disturbing messages, photographs that appear to be from Erica, claims that she's alive. At first we thought maybe she'd survived somehow, maybe there was hope. But our private investigators have confirmed these images are sophisticated forgeries, photoshopped manipulations designed to torture us." She produced a tablet and held it up to the cameras, showing what looked like analysis of the scar photo I'd sent them. The forensic analysis labeled it as digitally manipulated, though I knew for a fact it was completely authentic. She'd hired someone to create fake analysis reports, manufacturing evidence to support her lie. "Whoever is doing this knows intimate details about our family," Melissa said, her voice rising with calculated emotion. "They know our phone numbers, our addresses, our schedules. They've been stalking us, terrorizing us during the worst time of our lives. They've sent us emails containing private family information that must have been obtained through hacking or theft. They're trying to destroy us, and we don't know why." The performance was masterful. She sobbed about her beloved sister, about childhood memories that were complete fabrications, about how much she missed me and wished she could have one more conversation. She talked about our relationship as if we'd been close, as if she'd loved me, as if my death was genuinely devastating, rather than the goal she'd been working toward for years. "I'm begging law enforcement to find whoever is doing this," she pleaded, looking directly into the cameras with eyes swimming with crocodile tears. "This person is sick, disturbed, and they need help. But they also need to be stopped before they hurt someone else." My family is living in fear, unable to grieve properly because we're being tormented by this stranger who's using my sister's death as a weapon against us." She ended with a prayer, hands clasped, head bowed, murmuring something about finding peace and forgiveness. The religious imagery was deliberate, designed to appeal to viewers who valued faith and would be sympathetic to someone turning to God in their darkest hour. The questions from reporters came fast, but Melissa had clearly prepared. She deflected inquiries about the FBI investigation by claiming it was routine in any high-profile disappearance. She dismissed questions about financial irregularities by suggesting they were victims of identity theft themselves. She painted every piece of evidence against them as either coincidence or part of the persecution they were suffering. Some reporters weren't buying it. I could see skepticism in their questions, but others seemed sympathetic. One asked if she had a message for whoever was tormenting her family. Melissa's answer was perfectly calibrated. "I forgive you. Whatever pain you're in that's making you do this, I forgive you. I just hope you'll stop before this destroys more lives." The press conference ended with Melissa being comforted by the family's lawyer, who announced they were offering a reward for information leading to the identification of the person impersonating Erica Newman and harassing this grieving family. Jennifer Walsh called within minutes of the broadcast ending. "She's good," Jennifer said grimly. "I hate to admit it, but she's very good. Social media is already dividing into camps, people who think she's lying and people who think she might be telling the truth. She's created just enough reasonable doubt to muddy the waters." I watched clips of the press conference replay across news networks, saw pundits debating whether Melissa seemed genuine, heard body language experts analyze her microexpressions, and declare her either a grieving sister or a skilled manipulator depending on their biases. "She's trying to get ahead of my return," I said to Jennifer. "She's establishing a narrative where I'm either dead and being impersonated, or I'm mentally disturbed and not credible. Either way, when I do appear, she's planted seeds of doubt about whether people should believe me." "Exactly," Jennifer confirmed. "She's hoping that by the time you reveal yourself enough, people will question your story, that she can claim you're delusional, or part of some elaborate fraud, or suffering from trauma-induced false memories. She's building an escape hatch." I thought about the evidence packages prepared by the Foundation's legal team. Melissa's press conference assumed I only had circumstantial evidence, manipulated photos, stolen emails. She didn't know about the DNA tests that would prove I wasn't related to the Newmans. She didn't know about the authenticated birth certificate showing Elena Brooks as my mother. She didn't know about the dock security footage that couldn't be explained away as forgery. And she definitely didn't know that her own father had just promised to testify against her. "Let her build her house of cards," I said. "The foundation is already cracked, and she doesn't even know it." Dr. Chen joined the call, her expression serious. "There's something else you should know. Melissa's press conference included a plea for you to come home if you're out there scared and confused. She's trying to create a scenario where if you do appear, she can claim you're mentally ill and she was trying to help you all along." "She's desperate," I observed. "This is what cornered animals do. They bare their teeth and try to appear dangerous even when they're terrified." "Desperation makes people unpredictable," Dr. Chen warned. "We need to accelerate Phase 3. The longer we wait, the more time she has to manipulate public opinion and potentially destroy evidence. I recommend we move up your public appearance to this week." I looked at the Montana mountains through the cabin window at the isolation I'd used to prepare myself for what was coming. My preparation was complete. My evidence was overwhelming. And now my own father had become a witness against them, something Melissa couldn't possibly have anticipated. "Schedule it," I said. "Melissa thinks she's controlling the narrative, but she's underestimated what proof I hold and who was coming to testify against her." The Foundation coordinated the evidence release with precision timing, designed to catch the Newman family and their supporters completely off guard. At 9:00 a.m. Eastern Time, exactly 48 hours after Melissa's press conference, Dr. Chen held her own media event at the Foundation's headquarters in Boston. I watched via secure video feed as Dr. Chen stood before a room packed with journalists, her expression grave and professional. Behind her, large screens displayed the Elena Foundation logo and the words, "Scientific Truth, DNA Evidence in the Erica Brooks Case." "Thank you for coming on short notice," Dr. Chen began. 2 days ago, Melissa Newman held a press conference claiming that communications allegedly from her deceased sister were forgeries created by a disturbed individual. Today, we're presenting scientific evidence that definitively proves who Erica Newman really is, and more importantly, who she is not. The first slide appeared on the screens, a DNA analysis report from GeneMark Laboratories, one of the most respected genetic testing facilities in the country. The report compared my DNA to archived samples from the Newman family's medical records obtained legally through the FBI investigation. This analysis shows 0 genetic markers shared between Erica Newman and any member of the Newman family, Dr. Chen stated flatly. Not parent-child, not sibling, not even distant cousin. There is no biological relationship whatsoever. The probability of these results being an error is less than 1 in 10 billion. The room erupted with questions, but Dr. Chen raised her hand for silence. There's more. We also conducted DNA analysis comparing Erica's genetic profile to preserved medical samples from Elena Brooks, who died in 1995. The results show a parent-child relationship with 99.97% certainty. Erica Newman is actually Erica Brooks' biological daughter of Elena Brooks. The second slide showed that analysis, the genetic markers aligning perfectly, the statistical certainty absolute. I watched reporters frantically typing, phones being raised to capture the screen. The energy in the room shifting from skeptical curiosity to shocked recognition that they were witnessing something massive. These tests were conducted independently by 3 separate laboratories. Dr. Chen continued displaying certification documents. GeneMark, Pacific Diagnostics, and Heritage DNA all reached identical conclusions. The science is irrefutable. Erica Newman is not genetically related to the people who raised her. The third slide was my birth certificate, the original document sealed in a protective sleeve, photographed in high resolution. This is Erica's authentic birth certificate filed with Harbor County on March 3, 1990. Mother Elena Marie Brooks. Father David Arthur Brooks. The document has been examined by 3 forensic document experts, all of whom confirm its authenticity and original 1990 date. She advanced to the next image, hospital records from Harbor General Medical Center. Elena Brooks was admitted on March 2, 1990, and gave birth to twin daughters at 3:47 and 3:54 a.m. on March 3. Both infants were healthy and discharged with their mother 4 days later. The attending physician, Dr. Patricia Morrison, is still practicing and has provided sworn testimony confirming she delivered twins to Elena Brooks that morning. Dr. Chen paused, letting the implications sink in. Twin daughters, Erica and Emma Brooks. Emma's death certificate shows she drowned in 1995 at age 5, the same year Elena Brooks died in what was ruled a traffic accident. The same year Erica mysteriously appeared in the Newman family's life with no photographs or documentation from before age 5. The room had gone nearly silent except for the sound of keyboard clicks and whispered conversations. Dr. Chen pressed on, showing slide after slide of documentation, adoption paperwork that couldn't be located in any official records, legal custody documents with suspicious irregularities, financial records showing the Newmans had been accessing funds from Elena's trust using Erica's identity for 30 years. The evidence indicates that the Newman family obtained custody of Erica Brooks through fraudulent or coerced means following Elena Brooks's death, Dr. Chen stated. They concealed her true identity, isolated her from anyone who might have known her as Elena's daughter, and raised her under a false name while systematically accessing her inheritance. This isn't grief. This isn't a family mourning a lost daughter. This is decades of identity fraud, financial exploitation, and quite possibly murder. The press conference lasted another hour, with Dr. Chen methodically answering questions and presenting additional documentation. By the time it ended, social media was exploding. The hashtag #JusticeForErica was trending again, but now the tone had completely changed. People weren't just outraged about a missing billionaire, they were horrified by what the evidence revealed. The media outlets that had given Melissa sympathetic coverage issued hasty retractions. One prominent cable news host who'd defended Melissa's press conference opened her next show with an apology. "I was wrong. We were all wrong. The DNA evidence is conclusive. The Newman family has been living a lie for 30 years. Legal experts flooded the airwaves with analysis. Former prosecutors lined up to explain how the evidence supported charges of kidnapping, identity fraud, conspiracy to commit murder, and potentially multiple homicides. Several pointed out that Elena Brooks's death should immediately be reinvested as a suspicious death rather than an accident. The district attorney's office issued a statement within hours. "In light of new evidence, we are reopening the investigation into Elena Brooks's death in 1995 and expanding our current investigation into the disappearance of Erica Brooks. We are also reviewing Emma Brooks's death certificate from the same year." By evening, protest crowds had gathered outside the Newman home, despite the foreclosure proceedings forcing them to move out. Someone had spray-painted "kidnappers" across the front gate. The neighbors who'd once treated them as social equals now gave interviews describing them as "always seemed cold," and "there was something off about that family." The stepmother released a statement through their lawyer calling the DNA evidence somehow fabricated, but providing no explanation for how 3 independent laboratories could have fabricated identical results. The statement was widely mocked online. My father, true to his promise, released his own statement that evening. "The DNA evidence is accurate. I have known for years that Erica was not our biological daughter. I remained silent due to cowardice and fear. I am prepared to testify fully about what I know regarding Elena Brooks's death, Emma Brooks's death, and the attempt on Erica's life. I accept whatever consequences come from my complicity in these crimes." His confession sent another shockwave through the news cycle. A family member turning on the others, admitting to decades of crimes, offering to testify. It was the final nail in the coffin of Melissa's carefully constructed victim narrative. Jennifer called me from the Foundation's media center, her voice buzzing with vindicated energy. Complete narrative collapse. Melissa's press conference has become a case study in how to spectacularly fail at damage control. Every outlet is running with the kidnapped heiress angle now. You're not a dead CEO anymore. You're the stolen daughter who survived murder and came back for justice. I should have felt triumphant. The evidence was public, undeniable, and devastating to the Newmans' defense. But watching the news coverage, I felt oddly detached, as if I were watching someone else's story unfold. Dr. Chen appeared on screen at the Foundation headquarters, fielding questions from a fresh wave of reporters. Someone asked if Erica Brooks was still alive. Dr. Chen's answer was carefully calibrated. "We believe she survived the attempt on her life and is currently in protective custody, preparing to face the family that tried to kill her." That's when my phone rang with an emergency alert from the Foundation's security team. Melissa had disappeared, cornered and desperate. Melissa did something that crossed from cruel into criminal. The Foundation's security alert came with a detailed briefing. 2 men, both with criminal records for assault and extortion, had been traced, attempting to locate my current whereabouts through illegal information broker networks. The digital forensics team had intercepted their communications within hours of the initial contact. "They were sloppy," Marcus Rivera explained over the secure video call, his screen showing transaction records and encrypted message logs. Melissa used a cryptocurrency account we hadn't frozen yet. She'd hidden it under a shell company name. She contacted them through a dark web forum, thinking she was being clever. But our monitoring systems flagged the moment someone started asking very specific questions about a woman matching your description in the Montana area. He pulled up the message thread, and I read Melissa's desperate, delusional planning in real time. She'd offered $10 million for my safe delivery to a location she'd specified, an abandoned property in rural Wyoming. The instructions were chillingly specific. I was to be unharmed but secured, brought to her within 48 hours, and kept isolated until she could convince me to see reason. "See reason," I repeated, almost laughing at the absurdity. She thinks she can convince me to just sign away my inheritance and pretend none of this happened. She's not thinking clearly, Dr. Chen said from another panel on the screen. The DNA evidence destroyed her victim narrative. She's facing murder charges, kidnapping charges, fraud charges. She's desperate and irrational, which makes her dangerous in unpredictable ways. The Foundation's security team had already intercepted the would-be kidnappers at a truck stop 200 miles from my location. Foundation operatives working in coordination with local FBI had approached the men posing as information brokers who could provide my exact location. The moment money changed hands, federal agents moved in. Both men, confronted with the choice between decades in federal prison or cooperation, had immediately confessed everything. They provided their phones showing Melissa's encrypted messages, cryptocurrency wallet transaction records, proving she'd paid them $50,000 up front, and detailed written instructions she'd sent about how to approach me, what to say, how to transport me without attracting attention. She even specified that I shouldn't be physically harmed, I said, reading through the instructions with grim fascination. She wrote, "She needs to be coherent and uninjured to sign legal documents. Use restraint, but not force. She'll understand once I explain the situation properly." Delusional, Jennifer Walsh said flatly. She genuinely believes she can talk her way out of this if she just gets you in a room. She thinks this is all a misunderstanding that can be resolved with the right conversation and the right paperwork. The FBI wanted to move immediately. Special Agent Torres contacted Dr. Chen directly requesting full cooperation and all evidence the Foundation had gathered. Within 3 hours, federal arrest warrants were issued for Melissa Newman on charges of conspiracy to commit kidnapping, solicitation of kidnapping, and wire fraud related to the cryptocurrency transactions. The timing of the arrest was almost poetic. Melissa had scheduled yet another media appearance, this time on a sympathetic cable news program known for giving controversial figures a platform to tell their side. She was mid-interview, tearfully explaining how she was being persecuted by shadowy forces when FBI agents entered the studio. The moment was captured on live television and immediately went viral. You could see Melissa's expression change from performative grief to genuine shock as Agent Torres approached with credentials displayed and handcuffs ready. "Melissa Newman, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit kidnapping, attempted kidnapping, and solicitation to commit federal felony crimes," Torres stated clearly, her voice carrying across the studio's microphones. "You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." Melissa tried to maintain composure, tried to look like this was another persecution, another false accusation. But her face had gone white. Her hands were shaking, and when the handcuffs clicked into place, she seemed to crumble inward. "This is a mistake," she said, her voice cracking. "I haven't done anything wrong. I'm trying to find my sister. I'm the victim here." "We have your encrypted messages hiring 2 men to kidnap Erica Brooks," Torres said, not unkindly, but absolutely firm. "We have cryptocurrency transactions you authorized, we have detailed instructions you provided, and we have full confessions from both men you hired. You're not a victim, Ms. Newman. You're under arrest." The interview host, to her credit, asked if cameras should stop rolling. Torres shook her head. "This is a matter of public record. Let them see what justice looks like." Melissa was led out of the studio in handcuffs, past cameras that had been set up to give her a sympathetic platform, now broadcasting her arrest to millions of viewers. Social media exploded instantly. The hashtag #MelissaArrested was trending within minutes alongside renewed calls for justice and demands that the entire family face prosecution. The 2 hired men, in exchange for reduced charges, provided extensive interviews to federal investigators. They described Melissa's initial contact, her promises of millions of dollars, her insistence that this was about protecting family assets from someone who was mentally unstable and dangerous. They'd believed they were being hired for a legitimate intervention until the moment FBI agents arrested them and explained they'd been recruited for a kidnapping conspiracy. News outlets ran split screens on one side, Melissa's arrest footage playing on loop, and on the other legal experts explaining how this latest crime added years to her potential sentence and provided prosecutors with fresh evidence of ongoing criminal intent. The stepmother's lawyer released a brief statement attempting to distance his client from Melissa's actions. Mrs. Newman had no knowledge of or involvement in her daughter's alleged activities. But the public wasn't buying separation narratives anymore. They saw a family united in crime, and Melissa's desperate attempt to kidnap me was just the most recent and most blatant example. I watched all of it from the Montana safe house surrounded by Foundation security, who'd been prepared to defend me if the kidnappers had somehow gotten through. The threat had been neutralized before I'd ever been in real danger, but it had served a purpose, providing absolutely irrefutable evidence of Melissa's willingness to commit serious crimes to avoid facing consequences for her past crimes. Dr. Chen called as the news coverage reached fever pitch. The federal prosecutor wants to fast-track this to trial. With Melissa's arrest, your father's promised testimony, and the mountain of evidence we've compiled, they're confident they can move quickly. Are you ready? I looked at my reflection in the cabin window, seeing not Erica Newman anymore, but Erica Brooks, the daughter who survived the woman who came back, the heir reclaiming everything that had been stolen. I'm ready, I said. Next stop, the courtroom where the whole truth would finally be told. The federal courthouse in Boston was surrounded by media trucks and crowds of people holding signs demanding justice when I arrived with my security detail. The Foundation had coordinated every aspect of my entrance, but nothing could have prepared me for the emotional weight of walking through those doors knowing what was about to happen. The courtroom was packed beyond capacity, with overflow crowds watching on monitors in adjacent rooms. I'd requested permission to sit in the witness section rather than the gallery, wanting the Newman family to see me the moment I entered. The bailiff opened the door and I stepped through. The effect was instantaneous and electric. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Heads whipped around. Someone gasped audibly. I walked down the center aisle in measured steps, my eyes fixed forward, refusing to look at the defense table yet. Melissa saw me first. The color drained from her face so completely she looked like a corpse. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. She gripped the table edge, her knuckles going white. The stepmother's reaction was more dramatic. She half stood from her chair, swaying before her lawyer grabbed her arm to steady her. Her perfectly composed courtroom appearance, the expensive suit, the carefully styled hair couldn't hide the naked shock and terror in her expression. My father didn't look up. He simply dropped his head into his hands and kept it there, shoulders shaking slightly. Cameras flashed despite the judge's strict no photography order. The bailiffs moved to confiscate phones, but the damage was done within seconds. Images of my courtroom entrance were spreading across social media with captions like, "She's alive," and "The ghost returns." Judge Catherine Morrison, a stern woman in her 60s known for running an orderly courtroom, hammered her gavel repeatedly. "Order, I will have order in this courtroom, or I will clear it entirely." It took 3 rounds of gavel strikes before the chaos subsided to merely electric tension. I took my seat in the witness section, finally allowing myself to look directly at the defense table. Melissa stared at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Shock certainly, but also something like betrayed disbelief, as if even now she couldn't accept that I'd survived and come back to destroy her. The prosecution's opening statement was delivered by Assistant U.S. Attorney David Park, a prosecutor known for his methodical approach to complex fraud cases. He walked the jury through the evidence, systematically building the narrative piece by piece. The dock security footage played on courtroom monitors, showing my father removing life vests. The stepmother checking items off a list, Melissa disposing of safety equipment. Park let it play without comment, letting the jury watch the careful, deliberate preparation for murder. Next came the emails projected on screens for everyone to see. The stepmother's message, "We need to act before Erica turns 35 and starts asking questions." Melissa's response, "She won't survive long out there. The sharks are hungry this time of year." My father's sole contribution to the thread, "Are you certain this is the only way Park presented Elena's letter authenticated by 3 handwriting experts who testified it was genuinely written by her shortly before her death. The jury listened as the letter was read aloud, Elena's desperate warning to a daughter she knew she'd never see again. The DNA evidence was displayed on large screens, color-coded charts showing zero genetic connection to the Newmans' 99.97% match to Elena Brooks. Park brought in Dr. Sarah Chen, a genetics expert who explained in clear language that there was no possibility of error, no room for doubt. Birth certificates appeared next mine, and Emma's showing we were twins born to Elena and David Brooks in 1990. Hospital records confirmed the births. Dr. Patricia Morrison, now 73 but still sharp, testified that she personally delivered both babies and remembered Elena Brooks clearly. The financial evidence took an entire afternoon to present 30 years of fraud-documented transaction by transaction. Marcus Rivera testified as an expert witness explaining how the Newmans had systematically looted the trust Elena had established, using my identity to access funds they had no legal right to touch. But it was the next witness who transformed the trial from fraud case to murder investigation. Dr. Richard Henley, 81 years old and long retired, walked slowly to the witness stand with the careful steps of someone carrying enormous guilt. "Dr. Henley," Park began gently, "can you tell the court about your interaction with the Newman family in June of 1995? Henley's voice was quiet but steady. "They brought me a child's body. A little girl, maybe 5 years old. They said she drowned while swimming, that it was a tragic accident. They asked me to certify the death without a full autopsy." "And did you?" "Yes." Henley's hands trembled. "They paid me $50,000. I was having financial problems facing bankruptcy. They said an autopsy would be traumatic for the family, unnecessary for such a clear-cut drowning. I wrote the death certificate listing cause of death as accidental drowning, no autopsy required." A Park presented the check preserved for 30 years made out to Dr. Henley from a Newman family account. He showed emails from 1995 where the arrangements were discussed. Most damning was a draft of Emma's death certificate in Henley's own handwriting with a note in the margin, "Family requests no post-mortem exam comply." "Why are you coming forward now, Dr. Henley?" Park asked. "Because I saw the news about Erica being pushed off a yacht," Henley said, his voice breaking. "Same family, same location, same method. I realized they'd done it again, and my silence 30 years ago had allowed them to keep killing. I couldn't live with that anymore." The courtroom was utterly silent. Melissa had her head down on the table. The stepmother sat rigid, staring at nothing. My father continued to hide his face in his hands. Judge Morrison leaned forward, her expression grave. "Let me make sure I understand this correctly, Dr. Henley. You're testifying that the Newman family paid you to falsify a death certificate for a child who drowned under suspicious circumstances in 1995. "Yes, Your Honor." "And that child was Emma Brooks, twin sister to Erica Brooks, who is sitting in this courtroom today after surviving an attempt to drown her in the same waters." "Yes, Your Honor." The judge's voice cut through the courtroom with absolute clarity. "This family has been killing for 35 years. The jury deliberated for 2 hours and 47 minutes. I know because I counted every minute sitting in a private room adjacent to the courtroom with Dr. Chen and the Foundation's legal team, waiting for the verdict that would define whether 35 years of suffering had any meaning. When the bailiff announced the jury had reached a decision, the courtroom filled within minutes. I returned to my seat in the witness section, close enough to see every detail of what was about to happen. The jury foreman, a middle-aged teacher from suburban Boston, stood when Judge Morrison asked if they'd reached a verdict. "We have, Your Honor. In the matter of United States versus Melissa Newman on the count of conspiracy to commit murder, how do you find Yacht guilty?" Melissa's sharp intake of breath was audible across the courtroom. "On the count of attempted murder, guilty. On the count of conspiracy to commit kidnapping, guilty." The guilty verdicts continued through all 17 counts: financial fraud, wire fraud, identity theft, each one landing like a hammer blow. By the 8th count, Melissa had started shaking uncontrollably. By the 15th, she was crying silently, tears streaming down her face, unchecked. The judge set sentencing for 2 weeks later, but everyone knew what was coming. Federal sentencing guidelines for the crimes Melissa had been convicted of left little room for leniency. When sentencing day arrived, the courtroom was once again packed. Judge Morrison reviewed the pre-sentencing reports, the victim impact statements, and the recommendations from both prosecution and defense. Then she looked directly at Melissa. "Ms. Newman, you orchestrated a plan to murder your adoptive sister for financial gain. When that failed, you attempted to have her kidnapped. The evidence shows a pattern of escalating violence manipulation and absolute disregard for human life. You showed no remorse during trial and have offered no explanation beyond self-serving lies. The court sentences you to 25 years in federal prison with no possibility of parole before serving 20 years. The words hung in the air for a moment before their full weight registered. 25 years. Melissa was 33 years old. She'd be 53 before she could even apply for parole, 58 if parole was denied. She screamed, an incoherent animal sound of rage and despair. She tried to stand, but her legs wouldn't support her. She collapsed against the defense table, sobbing so hard she couldn't breathe. The marshals had to physically lift her, one on each arm, as she wailed, "This isn't fair. I didn't do anything. She ruined everything." Even in her final moments before being taken away, she was blaming me. Not accepting responsibility, not acknowledging her crimes, just rage that I'd survived and fought back. The marshals carried her from the courtroom as she continued sobbing incoherently, her cries echoing down the hallway long after the doors closed. The gallery remained silent. No one cheered, no one applauded. The moment was too heavy for celebration, weighted with the knowledge of 2 murders, 30 years of lies, and a family whose bonds had always been built on greed rather than love. The sentencing for my stepmother and father came next. They'd been convicted as accomplices and co-conspirators in Elena's murder, Emma's death, and the attempt on my life, along with decades of financial crimes. Judge Morrison sentenced each to 20 years in federal prison. At 62 and 63 years old, respectively, these were life sentences. They'd both be over 80 if they survived to see release. The stepmother stood perfectly straight as the sentence was read, her face a mask of cold fury. She offered no statement, showed no remorse, gave no indication she believed she'd done anything wrong. Even now she was defiant, refusing to acknowledge that she'd spent 35 years destroying lives for money. The marshals led her away with her head held high as if she were the wronged party in all of this. My father's sentencing was different. He'd cooperated fully with prosecutors, providing testimony that had sealed the case against his wife and Melissa. Judge Morrison acknowledged this cooperation, but noted that decades of silence and complicity in murder cannot be erased by 11th-hour honesty. Before being sentenced, my father asked permission to address the court. He turned to look directly at me, his eyes red-rimmed but steady. "Erica," he said, his voice rough. "I can't ask for forgiveness. I don't deserve it. I was weak when you needed strength, silent when you needed protection, complicit when you needed a defender. I watched them hurt you for 30 years and did nothing. That makes me as guilty as if I'd pushed you myself. I'm sorry. It means nothing now, but I'm sorry." I nodded slightly. Not forgiveness. I wasn't ready for that, might never be ready, but acknowledgement that he'd finally told the truth. It was more than his wife or Melissa had been capable of. The court also issued financial judgments. All assets seized from the Newman family were ordered as restitution to me, though there was little left after the legal fees and the foreclosure. More significantly, the court officially recognized me as the sole legitimate heir to Elena Brooks's estate. The full accounting was staggering. Elena's trust had grown to over $2.3 billion through 30 years of compound growth in tech stocks she'd wisely invested in during the early 1990s. Stock in companies that had become household names purchased when they were small startups, now worth fortunes. But more important than the money was what came next. Judge Morrison signed the order officially restoring my legal identity. The court recognizes that the woman before us is Erica Marie Brooks, daughter of Elena Marie Brooks and David Arthur Brooks. All documentation listing her as Erica Newman is hereby declared fraudulent and void. Her true identity is restored. After 35 years of living as someone I wasn't, my real name was finally legally undeniably mine again. I should have felt triumphant. The people who'd tried to kill me were going to prison. The fortune my mother had built for me was secured. My identity was restored. Justice had been served as completely as any court could serve it. But sitting in that courtroom watching marshals lead away the people who'd raised me, I felt something more complicated than triumph. I felt empty, exhausted, and strangely hollow. Justice, I learned, was not the same as healing. The breakdown came 6 hours after the sentencing in the antiseptic quiet of my hotel room. Dr. Chen had offered to stay, but I'd insisted I needed to be alone. I thought I could handle it. I'd handled everything else, hadn't I? The investigation, the evidence gathering, the courtroom testimony, watching the people who raised me, sentenced to spend the rest of their lives in prison. But the moment the door closed and I was truly alone for the first time since the trial ended, something inside me shattered. I made it to the bathroom before the sobs started violent and uncontrollable, racking my entire body. I collapsed onto the cold tile floor, crying so hard I couldn't breathe, making sounds I didn't recognize as coming from myself. 35 years of repressed pain, fear, and loneliness came pouring out all at once, and I was powerless to stop it. I cried for the child I'd been trying so desperately to be good enough, lovable enough, worthy enough for people who were planning to murder me. I cried for all those nights wondering what was wrong with me, why I couldn't make them love me, what I needed to change about myself to finally be acceptable. I cried for the birthday parties where they'd barely pretended to care, for the graduations they'd attended with cold disinterest for every accomplishment I'd achieved, hoping this time, maybe this time, they'd be proud. I cried for my mother, a woman I'd never known who'd loved me enough to die trying to protect me. For Elena, who'd fought powerful people while pregnant, who'd hidden her daughters to keep them safe, who'd been cornered into surrendering me and then murdered before she could get me back. I cried because she'd spent her final days knowing she was going to die, and knowing her daughters would be raised by the people who killed her. And I cried for Emma, my twin sister, my other half. Someone I should have grown up alongside, shared a room with, fought with, loved, with the uncomplicated bond of sisters who'd shared a womb. Instead, she'd been drowned at 5 years old in the same waters where they'd tried to drown me 30 years later, and I'd never even known she existed until weeks ago. The Foundation's security knocked after an hour, concerned by the sounds coming from my room. I managed to tell them I was okay, that I just needed time. But I wasn't okay. I was falling apart in a way I'd never allowed myself to fall apart before. Dr. Chen called the next morning and insisted I begin working with Dr. Amanda Torres, a trauma specialist who'd spent decades treating survivors of family violence and betrayal. I resisted at first. I'd won, hadn't I? Justice was served. Why did I need therapy? Because surviving isn't the same as healing, Dr. Chen said gently. You've spent months in survival mode, focused on gathering evidence and securing prosecution. Now that the external battle is over, you have to face the internal one. Dr. Hai Torres's office was warm and comfortable, designed to feel safe rather than clinical. Our first session, she simply let me talk. And once I started, I couldn't stop. I talked about the constant low-grade anxiety of my childhood, always feeling like I was walking on eggshells, never knowing which version of my parents I'd encounter, cold indifference or active cruelty. I talked about how I'd internalized their treatment, believing I must be inherently unlovable, that something fundamental about me was broken and wrong. You were a child being psychologically abused by people who had every reason to make you doubt yourself, Dr. Torres said. They needed you to feel worthless so you'd never question your place in their family. They needed you dependent and insecure so you'd never dig into your past. Your self-doubt wasn't a personal failing, it was their weapon. The sessions continued twice weekly, each one peeling back another layer of damage. We talked about my compulsive overachievement, how I'd built a billion-dollar company, partly from genuine talent, but also from a desperate need to prove I was worthy of existing. We talked about my difficulty trusting people, how I'd kept everyone at arm's length, because the people who were supposed to love me most had actually been my would-be murderers. How do I trust anyone again? I asked during one session weeks into therapy. How do I believe that people who say they care about me actually do when the people who raised me were planning my death? Slowly, Dr. Torres said, with small steps and lots of support. And by recognizing that the Newmans were aberrations, not the norm. Most people don't murder their children for money. In the evenings when the sessions left me raw and exhausted, I'd return to Elena's letter. I'd read it so many times I'd memorized every word, but I kept reading anyway, searching for connection with a mother I'd never meet. "I'm so sorry, my darling girl," she'd written. "Everything I did was to give you a chance at life, even if I couldn't be there to share it with you." I traced her handwriting with my finger, imagining the woman who'd written these words while being hunted, while knowing she was running out of time. She'd been barely older than I was now when she died. She'd been brilliant, successful, and strong, everything the Newmans had tried to prevent me from becoming. The realization hit me one night with crystalline clarity. I'd survived specifically to prove Elena's sacrifice hadn't been in vain. She'd given up everything, her life, her daughters, her future, betting that I'd be strong enough to eventually break free and reclaim what was mine. And I had. I'd become exactly what she'd hoped I'd become, despite 35 years of people trying to break me. That understanding brought both comfort and overwhelming grief. Comfort because it gave meaning to her death and my suffering. Grief because she'd never know she'd won. Never know. I'd survived. Never know that her plan had worked perfectly, even though it had taken 35 years to unfold. I cried for her again, but differently this time. Not the desperate broken sobs of trauma, but the clean healing tears of mourning, someone I loved and lost. I wished I could thank her, tell her I understood what she'd done, and why tell her I'd use her legacy to help others the way she'd tried to help me. Dr. Chen called one evening 3 months after the trial. "There's something Elena left for you," she said. "Something we've been holding until you were ready to receive it. I think you're ready now." "What is it?" "A recording," she replied. "Your mother's voice speaking directly to you." And then I found the recording, my mother's voice speaking directly to me. Dr. Chen delivered the recording personally, arriving at my apartment with a locked briefcase and an expression that was equal parts solemn and hopeful. Inside the briefcase was a single item, a digital audio player, old-fashioned by modern standards, with a note attached in Dr. Chen's handwriting. Per Elena's instructions to be given to Erica Brooks only after she has reclaimed her identity and secured her inheritance. Play alone. Take your time. I waited until Dr. Chen left, then sat on my couch with the player in my hands for a full 10 minutes, afraid to press play. This was my mother's voice. The only part of her I'd ever be able to experience directly. Once I listened to it, there would be nothing left to discover, no more pieces of her waiting to be found. Finally, I pressed play. The recording quality was good despite its age, and her voice came through clearly, warm, intelligent, carrying an underlying strength that reminded me eerily of my own voice when I was determined about something. "Hello, my darling Erica," she began, and I started crying immediately, hearing my name spoken with such tenderness by a woman I'd never known. "If you're hearing this, it means I didn't survive to protect you myself. It means they won, at least in the short term. I'm so sorry, sweetheart. I'm so desperately sorry." Her voice broke slightly, and I could hear her take a steadying breath before continuing. "Everything I did was to give you a chance at life, even if I couldn't be there to share it with you. I know you're probably angry with me, wondering why I gave you to them, why I didn't fight harder. But darling, I did fight. I fought with everything I had. They were just more powerful, more ruthless, and more patient than I could counter. When they threatened to kill you to make it look like an accident that no one would question, I had to choose between surrendering you temporarily or watching you die. I chose to keep you alive and hope I could find another way to get you back. She paused, and I heard papers shuffling in the background. Obviously, that didn't work out as I planned, but I didn't leave you defenseless, Erica. Everything I built, the trust, the foundation, the evidence packages, the network of people sworn to protect you, it's all designed to activate when you need it most. By the time you hear this, you should have discovered your true identity, accessed your inheritance, and had the resources to fight back against the people who took you from me. Her voice grew stronger, more determined. Now, I need you to understand something crucial about the money I'm leaving you. This fortune isn't just wealth, Erica. It's power to protect others the way I'm trying to protect you. Use it to help women who are trapped, manipulated, or erased like I fear you might be. Use it to build something that ensures no mother has to make the terrible choices I'm facing, and no daughter grows up alone like you might have to. I could hear the passion in her voice, the absolute conviction that this was important. I've seen too many women destroyed by men who use money as a weapon, who exploit legal systems designed to protect the powerful, who isolate and control and break them down until they can't fight back. I tried to help where I could, but one person can only do so much. You, though, you'll have resources I never had. You'll have the benefit of experiencing what it means to survive that kind of manipulation. Use that knowledge. Use that strength. Build something bigger than both of us. She laughed softly, a sound that carried both sadness and hope. I wish I could see the woman you'll become. Based on the infant I held, you're stubborn, brilliant, and absolutely fierce. You came into this world fighting Erica 7 minutes before your sister determined to be first. I used to joke that you'd grow up to be either a CEO or a revolutionary, maybe both. The mention of Emma made my breath catch. Your father would be so proud of you. Elena continued, her voice softening. David died when you were 2, a heart defect we didn't know about until it was too late. He was the kindest, most brilliant man I ever knew. You have his mind for systems and patterns, his ability to see solutions where others see problems. And I hope you have my refusal to accept injustice, my inability to stay quiet when I see people suffering. There was a long pause, and when she spoke again, her voice was thick with emotion. I believe you'll live a life more beautiful than anything they intended for you. You carry my strength and your father's brilliant mind. You carry the love of 2 parents who wanted desperately to watch you grow up but didn't get the chance. But darling, you are not alone in this world, even if I can't be there. You are loved, you are worthy, and you are free. I was sobbing now, clutching the audio player like a lifeline. Make them remember what happens when they underestimate a Brooks woman, Elena said, her voice fierce again. Make them remember that we don't break, we don't surrender, and we protect our own, even across death and decades. Live, Erica. Live so fully and so fiercely that everyone who tried to erase you has to watch you thrive. That's the best revenge, becoming more than they ever imagined you could be. The recording continued for another few seconds with just the sound of her breathing, as if she was reluctant to end this final communication with the daughter she'd never see again. Then her voice came one last time, barely a whisper. I love you. Always. The recording ended. I sat in silence for a long time, tears streaming down my face, feeling something shift fundamentally inside me. I'd spent months seeking justice, and I'd achieved it. But justice alone felt hollow. Elena hadn't built a fortune and sacrificed her life just so I could put bad people in prison. She'd done it so I could build something that would outlive all of us. Something that would prevent other daughters from losing their mothers, other mothers from losing their daughters. I knew exactly how to honor her legacy and my sister's memory. Elena's recording gave me clarity I hadn't possessed before. Justice had been necessary, but it wasn't enough. My mother hadn't sacrificed everything just so I could punish the people who wronged us. She'd built a fortune and established protections because she understood that individual justice doesn't prevent systemic abuse. If I wanted to truly honor her memory, I needed to build something that would protect other daughters, other mothers, other families targeted by predators who used money and manipulation as weapons. I met with Dr. Chen and the Foundation's board 3 days after listening to Elena's recording. "I want to expand," I told them, "not just maintain what my mother started, but transform it into something that can actually change lives on a massive scale." Over the next 6 months, I poured myself into reimagining the Elena Foundation. We'd been operating as a small but effective charity, helping perhaps 50 women a year escape abusive situations. I wanted to help thousands. I hired directors for new divisions: legal services, housing assistance, job training, mental health support, financial literacy, education. We established safe houses in 15 states, each one a fully furnished home where women could stay rent-free for up to 6 months while they rebuilt their lives. Not shelters, actual houses with bedrooms, kitchens, yards where their children could play. Places that felt like homes, not temporary accommodations. The legal division was particularly close to my heart. We recruited attorneys willing to work pro bono or reduced fee specializing in family law, estate law, and criminal defense. Too many women stayed in dangerous situations because they couldn't afford legal representation. We changed that equation, ensuring that any woman who came to us would have expert legal support regardless of her ability to pay. Financial literacy became another cornerstone. I'd seen too clearly how the Newmans had used my ignorance about my own finances to maintain control. We developed comprehensive courses teaching women how to understand bank accounts, credit reports, investment basics, and estate planning. Knowledge was power, and we were arming women with the knowledge to protect themselves. The therapeutic services expanded dramatically. We contracted with trauma specialists, family therapists, and support group facilitators. Every woman who came through our doors had access to professional mental health support for as long as she needed it. I understood from personal experience that surviving trauma was just the first step. Healing from it required professional help and time. Within the first year, we helped over 300 women escape various forms of family exploitation and abuse. I read every intake form, every success story, every testimonial. A daughter whose parents had been stealing her disability benefits for years. A wife whose husband had hidden all their assets in offshore accounts she couldn't access. A mother whose adult children had manipulated her into signing over her home while she was recovering from surgery. Each story was different, but the underlying pattern was the same: people using love and family bonds as weapons for financial gain. I visited the safe houses personally, talking with the women staying there, hearing their stories, offering what comfort and encouragement I could. Many of them recognized me from the news coverage of my case, and that recognition became a source of strength for them. If I could survive and fight back, maybe they could too. The Elena and Emma Brooks Scholarship was announced on what would have been Emma's 40th birthday, a day that felt significant, a milestone she'd never reach, but I could honor. The scholarship focused on young women pursuing careers in technology, particularly in fields where Elena had pioneered software development, venture capital tech entrepreneurship. We offered full 4-year scholarships to 50 students in the first year, covering tuition, room board, and providing a stipend for living expenses. But more than money, we provided mentorship. I personally recruited tech industry leaders, many of them women who'd faced their own battles with discrimination and exploitation, to mentor our scholars. We arranged summer internships at top companies, connected them with networks that would support their careers, and created a community where brilliant young women could thrive. The response was overwhelming. We received over 10,000 applications in the first year. Reading through them, young women from every background imaginable. Many of them the first in their families to attend college, many escaping poverty or abuse situations, reminded me why this work mattered. Several tech companies whose stock Elena had purchased in the early 1990s, now worth billions, reached out to partner with the scholarship program. They established their own matching funds, created additional internship opportunities, and treated our scholars like future industry leaders. Elena's early faith in these companies had made them successful, and now they were investing in the next generation in her name. The documentary came about almost accidentally. A filmmaker named Sarah Martinez had been following my story since the trial and approached me about telling it comprehensively. I was hesitant at first. I'd had enough of public exposure, enough of being examined and analyzed. But Sarah convinced me that my story could inspire others, particularly women my mother's age who felt it was too late to escape bad situations or reclaim lost ground. The Inheritance of Truth took 8 months to produce. Sarah interviewed me extensively, spoke with Dr. Chen and the foundation team, talked to women who'd been helped by our programs, and even managed to get brief interviews with some of the jurors from the trial. She obtained courtroom footage, family photographs, and created animations to illustrate the complex financial fraud. The documentary premiered at Sundance and was immediately picked up by a major streaming platform. Within the first month, it had been viewed by over 20 million people. The response was extraordinary, particularly from women in their 50s, 60s, and 70s, who reached out to say they saw their own experiences reflected in mine. "I stayed in a marriage for 30 years because I thought I had no options," one woman wrote. "Watching your story made me realize it's never too late. I filed for divorce last week. I'm 68 years old and finally free." The documentary's tagline, "It's never too late to reclaim your life," became something of a cultural moment. I saw it on social media, on protest signs and graduation speeches. Women's organizations adopted it as a rallying cry. The message resonated. Survival was possible, justice was achievable, and transformation could happen at any age. The foundation's donations increased tenfold after the documentary's release. Women who'd escaped their own abusive situations sent contributions, some small, some substantial, all accompanied by notes saying they wished something like this had existed when they needed help. We were able to expand to 25 states, hire more staff, help more women. I was giving a speech at the Foundation's annual fundraiser surrounded by survivors and supporters when I realized how far I'd come from that moment on the yacht when Melissa pushed me into the ocean. I'd transformed my mother's sacrifice and my own suffering into something that would outlive all of us, something that would protect women for generations to come. But there was still one piece of unfinished business, one conversation I'd been avoiding but knew I needed to have. Before I could truly move forward, I had one final conversation to complete. The Federal Correctional Institution where Melissa was serving her sentence was 3 hours north of Boston, a sprawling complex of razor wire and concrete that looked exactly like what it was, a place where people paid for their crimes. I'd avoided visiting for over a year, telling myself I didn't owe her anything, that the chapter was closed, but Dr. Torres had gently suggested that until I confronted Melissa directly, I'd always carry unfinished business. The visiting room was sterile and depressing, filled with plastic chairs bolted to the floor and the low murmur of other prisoners talking with family members. When Melissa was brought in, I almost didn't recognize her. Prison had stripped away every bit of polish she'd once maintained so carefully. She'd lost at least 30 pounds, her face gaunt and hollow-cheeked. Her hair, previously always professionally colored and styled, hung limp and gray-streaked around her shoulders. The orange jumpsuit hung loose on her frame. But it was her eyes that shocked me most. They held a wildness, a barely controlled rage that made her look unhinged. She sat down across from me and immediately launched into attack. "You destroyed my life!" Her voice was harsh, raw, from disuse or screaming. "I had everything, money, status, respect, until you came crawling back from the ocean, like some kind of vengeful ghost. I should be living in that mansion, managing that fortune, being someone important. Instead, I'm rotting in this hellhole because you survived." I let her rage, watching her with the calm detachment I'd learned in therapy. This wasn't about me. This was about her facing the consequences of her own choices and being unable to accept responsibility. "Are you finished?" I asked when she finally paused for breath. "Finished? I'll never be finished. You ruined everything." "No, Melissa," I said quietly but firmly. "I didn't destroy your life. You destroyed it yourself the moment you chose greed over humanity. You had countless chances to choose differently, to refuse the plan, to warn me, to stop them. Every single day for 30 years you could have been a better person. You chose not to." Her face crumpled, the rage giving way to something more desperate. "You don't understand. You never understood. Then explain it to me." She was silent for a long moment, her hands clenched into fists on the table between us. When she finally spoke, her voice was broken, defeated. "I was adopted too," she said, and the words came out like a confession she'd been holding back for years. "Did you know that? Of course you didn't. They never told anyone. Mom found me in foster care when I was 3 years old. I'd been bounced between 6 homes in 2 years. She showed up at the group home, picked me out like I was special, told me I was chosen. That I was her daughter, now that I'd never be abandoned again." She laughed bitterly. "I believed her. I actually believed I mattered to her. Then 5 years later you arrived. This tragic little orphan with a dead mother and a secret trust fund worth billions. Suddenly, everything was about you, making sure you stayed under control, managing your inheritance, planning for the day when all that money would be ours. And I realized I'd never been special. I was just the practice daughter, the warm-up before the real prize arrived." Tears were streaming down her face now, but she didn't seem to notice. "You had a mother who loved you so much she built an entire organization to protect you. You had a fortune, a legacy, people who actually cared if you lived or died. What did I have? A woman who adopted me because she needed to look like a caring mother for when you showed up. I was furniture, Erica. Decoration. Something to make the family look normal while they plotted your murder." The confession hung in the air between us. I'd spent so much time seeing Melissa as pure villain that I'd never considered she might have been a victim too, just one who'd responded to victimization by becoming a perpetrator. "So you decided to help them kill me," I said. "Not a question. I decided to be valuable," she corrected. "If I helped them get your money, maybe they'd finally see me as important. Maybe I'd finally matter to someone. Instead, you survived and now I'm here, and I still don't matter to anyone." I looked at this broken woman across from me and felt something I hadn't expected, not forgiveness exactly, but a kind of sad understanding. We'd both been tools in the Newmans' schemes, just used differently. "There's a trust fund being established in your name," I said. $500,000. When you're released, you'll have money to rebuild your life." Melissa stared at me like I'd spoken in a foreign language. "What?" "My mother believed every forgotten girl deserves a second chance. That includes you. The money will be managed by the foundation until you're released, then transferred to you with one condition: you complete therapy and job training programs. Use it to become someone better than they made you." "Why?" she whispered. "After everything I did, why would you give me anything?" "Because I'm not doing this for you," I said, standing to leave. "I'm doing it to be the person they could never make me become, someone who breaks cycles instead of perpetuating them. You can waste this chance like you wasted every other one, or you can actually become the person you claim you wanted to be. That's your choice, Melissa. For once in your life, make a good one." I walked toward the exit without looking back. Behind me, I heard her sobbing. Not the manipulative tears she'd shed in courtrooms, but genuine broken crying that came from somewhere deep and wounded. One final door remained: the people who started it all. My father was housed in the medical wing of a different federal facility, one equipped to handle prisoners with serious health conditions. His neurological disease had progressed rapidly in the 18 months since sentencing, and according to the prison medical staff, he had perhaps a year left before the deterioration became completely debilitating. The guard led me to a small visiting room separate from the main facility designed for medical cases. My father sat in a wheelchair by the window, his hands trembling constantly in his lap, his body considerably thinner than I remembered. but when I entered, his eyes focused on me with surprising clarity. "Erica." He said my name, coming out slightly slurred but recognizable. "You came." "I came," I confirmed, taking the seat across from him. We sat in silence for a moment, and I could see him struggling to find words, his damaged brain making speech difficult. Finally, he managed, "I know I don't deserve forgiveness. I was weak when you needed strength. I chose my own comfort over your safety, over your life." His hands shook worse as he continued. "Every day I told myself I'd stop them tomorrow. Tomorrow I'd be braver. Tomorrow I'd find the courage to protect you. But tomorrow never came, and then you were 35, and they were planning your murder, and I'd wasted 30 years of tomorrows doing nothing." "You left me breadcrumbs," I said quietly, reaching out to steady his trembling hands. "The digital trails, the security footage, Elena's letter. You made sure I could find the truth." "Breadcrumbs," he repeated bitterly. "A coward's substitute for actual courage. You deserved a father who would fight for you, not one who left you clues while pretending he didn't know what was happening." I held his hands, feeling how frail he'd become. "It matters. Not enough to erase what you didn't do, but something. You helped me survive in the only way you were capable of. That's more than they did." We sat together for nearly an hour, mostly in silence. He told me haltingly about his time in prison, how the other inmates avoided him once they learned what he'd been convicted of. Even among criminals, there were lines you didn't cross, and participating in a plot to murder your own child was beyond the pale. "I'm glad you're building something good," he said as our time ended. "Elena would be proud. I think I'm proud too, for whatever that's worth from me." "It's worth something," I said, surprising myself by meaning it. I kissed his forehead before leaving a gesture I'd never given him as a child. "Goodbye, Dad. Goodbye, Erica. I hope you find peace." The visit to my stepmother was scheduled for the following day at her facility, a standard women's federal prison. Unlike my father's medical accommodation, she was housed in general population, subject to all the indignities and hardships of regular prison life. She looked older, but not broken. Her hair was still styled, as well as prison conditions allowed her posture rigid and proud despite the orange jumpsuit. When she saw me, her expression hardened into pure contempt. "Come to gloat?" she asked, her voice dripping with venom. "No, I came to close the door." "How noble of you." She leaned back in her chair, arms crossed. "The triumphant daughter magnanimously visiting the wicked stepmother. You must feel very satisfied with yourself." "Actually, I mostly feel tired," I said honestly. "Tired of carrying anger, tired of wondering why, tired of trying to understand how you could raise a child for 30 years while planning to kill her. Why didn't you just die like you were supposed to?" The question came out not as a shout, but as genuine bewilderment, as if my survival was an incomprehensible glitch in her perfect plan. I looked at her. This woman who'd fed me and clothed me and sent me to school, all while counting down the years until she could murder me and take my inheritance, and felt something unexpected. Not hatred, not even anger anymore, just a kind of distant pity. "Because my mother wanted me to live," I said simply. "Elena was stronger than you, smarter than you, more strategic than you. She anticipated everything you'd do, prepared for every contingency, and built protections that lasted 35 years after her death. You spent decades plotting, and you still lost to a dead woman." For the first time in the conversation, the stepmother had no response. Her mouth opened, then closed. The mask of superiority slipped, revealing something raw underneath the horrible realization that she'd lost completely and irreversibly to someone who'd been dead for 35 years. "You can sit here for the next 15 years, thinking about how unfair it all is," I continued, "or you can accept that you destroyed yourself through your own choices. Either way, it doesn't matter to me anymore. You don't matter to me anymore." I stood to leave, and she finally found her voice again. "I raised you. I gave you a home food education." "You imprisoned me," I interrupted. "You stole my identity. isolated me from my real family and tried to kill me when I was no longer useful. That's not raising a child. That's holding a hostage. She had nothing to say to that. I left her sitting in furious silence, knowing she'd never accept responsibility, never acknowledge what she'd done, never change. And I was okay with that. Her inability to grow or heal wasn't my burden to carry. Walking out of that prison for the last time, I felt something shift fundamentally inside me. The Newmans, all three of them, had occupied so much space in my life, first as the family I desperately tried to please, then as the enemies I needed to defeat. But standing in the parking lot breathing free air, I realized they didn't need to occupy any more of my time or emotional energy. I didn't forgive them. Forgiveness implies a relationship worth preserving, and we'd never had that. What we'd had was a 35-year hostage situation that ended with their imprisonment and my freedom. Instead of forgiveness, I simply released them. Released the anger, the need for continued confrontation, the urge to make them understand or repent. They were strangers now, locked away where they couldn't hurt anyone else, and I was free to live the life my mother had sacrificed everything to give me. I drove away from that prison, knowing I'd never return, never think of them again unless absolutely necessary. The chapter was closed, the door was locked, the past was finally truly over. Now it was time to return to where it all began and finally let it end. The Foundation arranged a private boat for me, no crew, no witnesses, just me and the ocean at dawn. I'd requested this specifically to return alone to the place where everything had ended and begun. The coordinates were exact. The same stretch of coastal water where Melissa had pushed me, where Emma had drowned 35 years before, where my mother's body had been found after her accident. These waters had been meant to erase the Brooks family completely. Instead, they'd become the place where I reclaimed everything. I stood at the railing as the boat anchored, holding a small urn that contained a portion of Elena's ashes. The Foundation had quietly arranged for her exhumation and cremation, giving me this final piece of her to lay to rest properly. The sun was just beginning to rise, painting the horizon in shades of amber and rose. The water was calm, almost peaceful, nothing like the dark terror I remembered from that night when I'd fought to survive. "Mom," I said aloud, my voice carrying across the empty water. "I never got to know you, but I've spent the last 2 years learning who you were through everything you left behind. You were brilliant, fierce, and you loved me enough to sacrifice your life trying to protect me. I'm sorry it took me 35 years to understand. I'm sorry I couldn't thank you while you were alive." I opened the urn, letting the wind take some of the ashes. They scattered across the water, glinting in the early morning light. "Emma," I continued, speaking to the sister I couldn't remember. "We should have grown up together. We should have fought over toys and shared secrets and been there for each other. They took that from us. But I'm living the life you never got to have, and I promise I'm living it big enough for both of us." More ashes to the wind, and waves dissolving into the ocean that had taken so much from me. "I survived because of you both," I said, tears streaming down my face but my voice steady. "Everything Mom built, every protection she put in place, every sacrifice she made, it all led to me standing here free and whole and strong. I'll live in a way that honors both of you. That's my promise." The last of the ashes scattered, and I stood watching them disappear, feeling something fundamental settle inside me. This ocean wasn't my grave. It was my baptism, the place where I'd died as Erica Newman and been reborn as Erica Brooks. I caught my reflection in the boat's window, a woman approaching 40, with my mother's dark eyes and determined jaw, carrying scars both visible and invisible, but standing tall and unbroken. I wasn't the frightened child who'd tried desperately to earn love from people incapable of giving it. I wasn't even the driven CEO who'd built a fortune trying to prove her worth. I was Erica Brooks, daughter of Elena Brooks, and David Brooks' sister to Emma Brooks, survivor of a 35-year conspiracy, heir to a legacy of strength and innovation, and protector of women who needed someone to fight for them, the way my mother had fought for me. The sun broke fully over the horizon, flooding the ocean with golden light. I felt warmth on my face and genuine peace settling over me for the first time in my entire life. Not the fragile, anxious peace of someone waiting for the next crisis, but the deep, solid peace of someone who knows exactly who she is and what she's meant to do. My company was thriving under new leadership I'd carefully selected, freeing me to focus on the foundation full-time. We were expanding to 30 states next year, helping thousands of women escape the kinds of situations that had defined my childhood. I spoke at universities and conferences sharing my story, not for sympathy, but to show others that survival was possible, justice was achievable, and transformation could happen at any age. The wealth my mother had built and protected for me wasn't just money in accounts and stock portfolios. It was power to change laws, protect the vulnerable, investigate suspicious deaths, and ensure that what happened to our family could never happen to others without consequences. I whispered to the rising sun, to the ocean, to the memory of the family I'd never known but would always carry. I became who they could never kill. Then louder, with absolute certainty. They tried to end my life at 5 by killing my sister. They tried again at 35 by pushing me into the sea, but all they did was awaken the legacy they could never destroy. I am Erica Brooks, daughter of Elena Brooks, and this is only the beginning of what her sacrifice created. I started the boat's engine and turned toward shore, toward the life waiting for me, toward the future my mother had died to give me. The ocean that was meant to be my grave disappeared behind me as I sailed into the light. That's the incredible true story of Erica Brooks, the daughter who survived, the woman who fought back, and the legacy that could never be destroyed. Her journey from victim to victor proves that it's never too late to reclaim your life, no matter how powerful your enemies or how long they've controlled you. If Erica's story moved you, inspired you, or made you think about the strength we all carry inside us, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. What part of her journey resonated most with you? Have you or someone you know faced similar family betrayal? Share your story. This community is here to support each other. And if you want more incredible true stories of survival, justice, and triumph over impossible odds, please subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss an episode. Remember, you're stronger than you know, and it's never too late to become who you were always meant to be. Thank you for listening.